The Waves Doubler plugin replicates the incoming audio signal to an additional 2 or 4 voices and was inspired by hardware such as the classic Eventide units built in the 1980s. You can control the gain, pan, delay, and pitch of each voice. This takes splitting a lead vocal or guitar track into a new dimension. I remember using various signal processors to double vocals in the late 1980s, essentially to thicken and widen the lead or backing vocal tracks. The difference with this and doubler is that doubler preserves audio duration when changing the pitch of the doubled signal. This replica is decorrelated by the initial detuning and the pitch can be further modulated. The end result is the effect of a doubled take rather than a signal mixed with a modulated version of the original track. Okay, let's check out the controls. The main components of doubler consist of voice control strips, direct signal controls, EQ, and master controls. Gain, pan, delay, and detune can be controlled using the graphic editing windows. Note, doubler can be used in many ways. It can be inserted on a mono or stereo track or used in an aux send return fashion to affect multiple tracks. You can also choose 2 or 4 voices. In our example, we are going to use doubler inserted on a mono track, but using the mono stereo instance to illustrate its basic capabilities. The per voice control strips are first. The voice on-off switch is first in line, followed by the gain control, which defaults to -12. There is also a master gain that can further control the output gain of all voices. The pan control ranges from -45, fully left, to 0, middle, and +45, fully right. The delay defaults to 8 milliseconds, but is variable between 0 and 100 milliseconds. This depends on the aligned direct and range parameters. When the direct is aligned, the minimal delay possible at any range is 0. When the direct is real-time, the minimal delay for range 80 Hz is 8 milliseconds and 14 milliseconds for 20 Hz. The feedback parameter can be set between 0 and 100%. Be very careful when adjusting high percentages of feedback, as a feedback loop can develop and damage your monitor system. The octaver switch drops the voice an octave below the direct signal, keeping other settings intact. Notice the downward arrow signifying the octaver selection. The detune parameter is variable between 0 and 100 cents. Remember, 100 cents equals a semitone. This is used to offset the doubled voice's pitch to create a thick chorus-like effect. Values between 2 and 12 cents can be very useful with doubler. Much further creates an effect that sounds out of tune. The modulation depth can be adjusted plus or minus 200 cents. Positive values start with an upward modulation, and negative values start with a downward modulation. The modulation rate sets the voice's pitch modulation rate, and at 1 Hz, the modulation will complete a full cycle in 1 second.
Bitter is the taste of
the following are the direct signal controls.
And I'm not ready, though they're saying it's my time.
First, there is a direct on-off switch. This is followed by a gain control, allowing us to mix the direct signal with the other doubled voices. Lastly, there is a pan control for the direct voice. The doubler's EQ controls contain high and low shelf filters, which affect only the doubled voices and not the direct signal. The low shelf can boost up to 12 dB and cut -24 dB from 16 Hz to 1600 Hz. The high shelf can boost up to 12 dB and cut -24 dB from 1000 Hz to 21,000 Hz. Use this EQ section to fine-tune the doubled voices to sit right in your mix. The master controls include a switch for align direct on-off, high pass, feedback, range control, modulation reset, and a master output fader. The align direct on-off aligns the direct signal's delay to the plug-in processing latency. This latency depends on the range, wherein 80 Hz equals 8 milliseconds and 20 Hz equals 14 milliseconds. When the align direct is off, there will be no delay added to the direct signal. The high-pass feedback allows you to adjust the high-pass filter cutoff frequency for the feedback control. The range control has two settings. 80 Hz has lower latency but less accuracy at shifting of low-frequency signals. It works fine for guitars and lead vocals, but when doubling bass instruments, you should use the 20 Hz setting. This also works well with mixed sources, such as background vocals, etc. The modulation reset control synchronizes the start of the different modulations that are dialed into your doubled voices. This parameter is automatable and can be used to create interesting modulation effects for the doubler's voices. Lastly, there is a master output fader and level peak display meters that have peak hold fields below the level meters. Here you can control and monitor the final outputs of the plugin. Let's take a little time to experiment with a vocal track.
I'm not beautiful, I just wanna take you home. You give me something to hold on to. You give me something to belong to. Yeah. Bitter is the taste of all I fear, and I'm not ready though they're saying it's my time. I wonder, am I making myself clear? Turning circles in a world that walks on lines.
As you can see, the doubler can be very useful as an effect texture for a variety of sources, such as vocals, guitar, piano, etc. Make sure to experiment with your own settings, and be sure to save the good ones.
Take you home. You give me something to hold on to. You give me something to belong to. Yeah. You give me something to hold on to.
Metaflanger by Waves is a plugin that can produce a variety of effects such as traditional analog flanging, vintage phaser emulation, classic tape flanging, and some other very creative and useful effects. In this example, the plugin is configured as an insert where the mix percent controls the wet-dry balance between the original and the affected signal. Let's go over the controls and then check out some of the great factory presets. On the far left of the plugin window, you will find the wet-dry mix controls and a phase reverse button next to them for reversing the phase of the wet signal. This can make the effect more dramatic. Click and drag up and down to change the wet-dry mix, or click in the field and type a value. The feedback setting controls the amount of delay output to be fed back into the delay's input. 50% means 50% of the wet signal is fed back to the input. Raising the feedback percentage will always increase the effect, but be careful of its ability to become very loud and potentially dangerous to your monitor system. Next to the feedback control is the phase button. Inverting the phase of the wet signal will intensify and complicate the signal with a little feedback dialed in. Below the feedback control is the high or low pass filter for the wet signal. This is very useful for applying chorus to a bass guitar. Set the filter to high pass and set the frequency to 1 or 2 kHz, and the chorus will not affect the lower frequencies and allow the retention of a full low-end tone. The low pass filter can be used to simulate vintage stompbox style flangers and phasers. The delay time is limited from between 0 and 50 milliseconds in 1/10 of a millisecond increments. Click and drag up or down to adjust, or click and type in the desired value in milliseconds. The rate controls the frequency of the low-frequency oscillator in Hertz. Increasing the rate value will increase oscillation speed. You can click and type in the frequency value or drag up and down with the mouse to change the rate. Depth controls the width that the wet signal is shifted in time, and this results in small pitch changes. It is measured in percents, and when the delay time equals 10 milliseconds, the depth will equal 50%. To hear the effect of depth, there must be some delay time and mix percentage dialed in for audible results. Let's adjust it on a track, for example. The rate and depth link button, when selected, keeps the pitch variation the same, no matter what value you use for the rate control. The button lights up green when active, and when so, changing rate or depth will change the other's value to keep the relationship between the two constant. If you don't have them linked and you increase the rate, the pitch variation will increase by Doppler effect. The next section contains the waveform, modulation, and stereo controls. The waveform allows the selection of sine or triangle low-frequency oscillator modulation. Triangle wave has only 2 pitches, while the sine wave produces a smooth variation from high to low pitch. Sine wave is the default setting and more widely used for modulation, but make sure to experiment with all of the controls to find your own arsenal of mixing tools. The modulation display graphically represents how the low-frequency oscillator parameters change when you alter the rate and depth settings. The stop button for modulation freezes the modulator wherever it is when you click it. This button can be automated for flanging a very specific moment in time for your mix. The stereo image range is from 0 to 180. This controls the phase between the left and right low-frequency oscillators. If it is set to 180, then the left side is flanging down while the right is flanging up. Make sure to experiment with lower values for creation of stereo swirls and nice chorus-style effects. Check out the Mutron biphase factory preset to see an example of this. To adjust the stereo field, click and drag your mouse from side to side, or merely click in the field and type in a specific value between 0 and 180. The last section to cover is the output fader and stereo meters, if stereo instance is used. Make sure to monitor these level indicators while using Metaflanger, since high feedback settings can increase the level of the affected track considerably. Make sure to lower the output fader if you see overs in the peak indicators. Digital clipping is not pleasant, and carefully avoiding it can yield very good sounding tracks and mixes. Let's load some presets to get an idea of the different settings that Metaflanger can perform. Metaflanger by Waves is extremely useful to create short delay and modulation effects that can make a mix specially memorable. It can also emulate classic effects such as tape flange, like Led Zeppelin drum sounds, etc. Make sure to save your modified presets and settings you may build from scratch for later use. Also, if you're the type that doesn't like to read the manuals for software, go against your gut and check out some of the Waves user guides for your plugins, as there is a wealth of helpful information to be found there. MondoMod combines amplitude modulation, also called tremolo, frequency modulation, also called vibrato, and rotation, Waves calls panning, and their usual intuitive graphic interface to create modulation effects without boundaries. Let's check out the controls. The tempo section is also considered the rate parameter. It is displayed in cycles per second and beats per minute. They both display the same information, just in different units. To adjust the control, simply click and drag in the field with the mouse or enter the value from the numeric keypad. The X or times factor control multiplies the tempo whether using hertz or beats per minute. The default setting is ×1, which equals the amount shown in the field exactly. Click on the button to change the values or click and hold to access the pull-down menu. The waveform section has 5 selections: square, saw down, saw up, triangle, and sine. First, let's check out the amplitude modulation section. The AM depth or tremolo control can be adjusted by the fader or by clicking and dragging in the depth field display. You can also click in the field and numerically type in the desired value. The on-off button engages or disengages the AM section. Notice that when you click on the phase button, you can change the phase relationship of the amplitude modulation from 90, 180, and 270 degrees. The frequency modulation or vibrato section is very similar in that you can input the values in the same manner previously described with the fader and the value field window. There is also a phase relationship button here as well. Between the AM and FM sections is the rotation control with large circular graphic display. The on-off button toggles the effect in and out. The center control adjusts the amount of rotation to the left and right channels. A 0 setting indicates the rotation will be dispersed equally between left and right. Negative settings indicate more audio to the right channel, and positive settings place more audio in the left channel. The center control setting can also be imaged as a focal point source of your audio signal. The range control adjusts the sweep range from left to right channels. A setting of 0 indicates no sweeping from left to right. A setting of 360 indicates full sweep from left to right. Next is the output section. The gain control ranges from -12 dB cut to 12 dB boost. The mix control or wet-dry adjusts the mix of the original signal and mondo mod signals. The output meter display has infinite peak style meters with over indicators above and peak numerical values below. As with all wave meters, simply click to reset the peak indication. It's time to use mondo mod on a guitar track. Mondo Mod is a great modulation processor with extra features to take it over the top of your ordinary run-of-the-mill modulation devices or plugins. Depending upon your host application, every parameter of MondoMod is automatable, which brings even more depth to its list of abilities and creative potential. Don't forget to check out coolschoolonline.com for more relevant movie tutorials. SuperTap by Waves is a very powerful delay processor with modulation and multi-tap capabilities. Audio delays have been used since the inception of multi-track recording. A delay line plays a copy of the original signal following a delay for a user-specified amount of time. If you play several delayed signals along with the original, you have what is called a multi-tap delay. Native applications will only show instances with modulation, and maximum delay time may vary from application to application. The included modulation parameters can be used to create chorus, flange, and other time-based effects. Multitap uses only frequency-based modulation to create special effects. A low-frequency oscillator of 20 Hz or below provides only a slight change in the delay time of each of the taps. This produces changes in the pitch of each output and is ideal for creating a chorusing effect. Let's go over the controls in this plugin window. We will start with the pan graph. Here, we can drag a pan graph marker to change gain, stereo position, and rotation of the delay taps at the same time. Remember that panning is for mono signals only, and rotation works with mono and stereo signals. The tempo section allows us to set the delay times based upon the session tempo. Here you can use the triangular push buttons to alter the tempo value up or down, as well as enter a number directly into the field, or merely drag on the BPM value display. Remember that BPM always refers to the quarter note. Fields for BPM and milliseconds are both present for visual feedback. The mode button changes the function of the tap pad between tempo and pattern depending on the desired mode. Tempo mode is merely for setting the delays to the tempo of the song. Here we can tap the tap pad with the mouse button, and SuperTap will automatically average the tempo from these taps. The longer you tap, the better, as erroneous taps will be averaged out. Pattern mode is for entering complex rhythm patterns with the various delay taps. Each tap takes the same delay as the sequence you tap on the tap pad. This may take some practice, but the results can be amazing. The modulator is comprised of an on-off button, rate and depth fields. Here we can create chorusing and other effect combinations. The output gain section is next, and here we can click on the fader to adjust the output gain plus or minus 12 dB, and the value will be displayed below the fader. To the right are the level meters, where we can click to reset any saved peaks or overs. Below the meters are fields showing decibel value of the highest peak level since the last reset. Below the pan graph is the direct control for the dry signal. You can change gain and rotation of the dry signal just as you do for each of the taps. You can also do this in the pan graph section. Each delay tap has its own set of controls arranged horizontally. From left to right there is an on-off button, gain, rotate, and tap delay grid. These controls are also the same for the feedback control under the delay taps. Below the feedback control is the snap to grid button and its controls. You can lock your taps to 6 different settings: free, quarters, quarter triplets, eighths, eighth triplets, and sixteenths. These combinations can produce dramatic delay effects that sync with the beat of the music. Grid mode can be changed from BPM to milliseconds. The EQ section contains an on-off button for each tap, a filter type pull-down, a frequency control, and gain control. Here we can control the sound and tone of each delay tap. The feedback section is something to be careful of, since you can create very loud sounds that get louder and louder and even create distortion. Experiment with the settings with your hand on the control room volume, as things can get out of hand very quickly. Let's play the track and adjust some parameters, and choose a few different presets from the Load pull-down menu.
Come clean, little boy blue, got to give away. Dig a hole all the way to church, everybody knows. Beauty sleeps in the fire, illuminate the way. It disappears, love was here, don't forget my name. Please don't get me wrong, I didn't mean to write an LA.
Super Tap is an extremely powerful effect with amazing multi-tap capabilities and rotation panning schemes.
Please don't get me wrong, I didn't mean to write an LA song, another LA song.
To achieve this kind of processing power with conventional hardware would be much more costly and complicated to patch together. The Pangraph and Delay Grid user interface is very intuitive since you can see the placement of your delay taps and dry signal panning and volume. You can then click and drag to change their settings. Make sure to check out all of the Waves user guides accompanying your product for even more helpful information. Waves Audio Track is a plugin that combines a 4-band EQ with a compressor and a gate. It is an extremely efficient and great sounding plugin that you can apply with multiple instances depending upon your system due to its lean DSP appetite. The basic signal flow for Audio Track is the input fader, followed by the 4-band paragraphic EQ, then the compressor expander gate section, and then the output fader. Let's check out the controls. First is the input fader. This is useful in creating headroom for EQ filters, which can cause an already hot signal to digitally clip. Adjust it with the provided fader or value field above. Next is the EQ section. The 4-band paragraphic EQ has a handy graphic editing screen in addition to fields for changing the parameter values. First are the on-off buttons for each band filter. One is yellow, and notice that the graphic marker for the band in the graphic editing window highlights appropriately with your selection. Double-clicking the marker also toggles the filter on-off switch. Next is the filter type selection for each band. Band number 1 choices are Bell, Low Shelf, High Shelf, and High Pass filter selections. Bands 2 and 3 have only the Bell, Low Shelf, and High Shelf filter selections. Band number 4 has Bell, Low Shelf, High Shelf, and Low Pass. Click on the Filter Type button to change its value or use the pull-down menu to switch filter selections. Used properly, the wide variety of EQ filter shapes can really add to the final clarity of a final master. Next is the gain control for each band. It ranges from plus or minus 18 dB. Drag the selected band marker up or down to adjust the gain. You can also click and drag in the value field or type values from the keyboard directly into this field. Next is the frequency control. Like the gain control, it can be controlled via the graphic marker in a left-right manner, dragging in the value field, or entering values with the keyboard. The bandwidth or Q control is next. Drag in the value window or enter the numbers with the keyboard to adjust the Q. Note, when you're using the graphic markers, you can also adjust the Q by holding the Option or Alt key and dragging left or right. This is really handy since with this simple modifier, we can control gain, frequency, and Q with the graphic interface. This makes sweeping to find problematic audio an easier task. You can hold Shift to select multiple bands or parameters to adjust them at the same time. It's easier just to click and drag around the particular controls that you want to group. Then, when you adjust one of them, the others will be altered in the same aspect. Next is the compressor expander section. The threshold control can be controlled by the marker next to the threshold meter or by clicking and dragging in the value field. You can also enter the value in the field via the keyboard. It controls at which level the compression or expansion begins. The ratio control displays either compression ratios of 1:40 or expansion ratio of 0.5:1. Click and drag in the field to change the ratio. You can type values directly into it, but remember the colon sign in between your number selections. This adjusts the amount of gain, increase, or reduction. The attack control determines how long it takes for the compression or expansion to begin once the threshold has been crossed. Slower attacks preserve transients, and faster attack times serve as better peak control. The release value adjusts the amount of time it takes for the signal to return to its original level previous to the compression or expansion effect. The gate section. The threshold sets the level that the gate engages upon the track to silence any signal below that level. You can adjust this with the blue triangle marker next to the threshold energy meter. You can also click and drag up or down in the value field to change the threshold for the gate. The floor sets the level of maximum attenuation of the gate. In other words, how far will the gate turn down the signal? This can be set to infinity, but sometimes this produces unnatural clicks and pop sounds while trying to eliminate background noise. Loosen up on the floor setting to retain some of the natural sound of the track if you are experiencing pops or other artifacts. The attack time sets the opening time for the gate after the signal passes the threshold. The release time sets the time it takes for the gate to fully engage. The output fader and meters are last. The output fader offers -24 dB in cut and 12 dB in boost with numeric field display above it. The output meters with clip indicators are reset simply by clicking anywhere on the meter display. Let's use AudioTrack to become more familiar with the controls.
I was so sure you were wrong, but I should have taken your advice. You would say, and I should say, everywhere we find the fence, in a world that didn't make sense, made a habit of mine. So I'm here asking why, when you're right, I believe this time you're right, when you're right, I believe this time success will cause some stress, living life in the city of sex, a fine line between. You would say, and I should say, everywhere I find the wild, you want every what I wonder why you don't, made a habit of mine. So I'm here asking why, when you're right, I believe this time you're right.
As per usual, Option or Alt clicking on any control returns it to its default setting. I use this shortcut frequently. AudioTrack is a DSP saving way to have high-quality filter and dynamics processing on each channel of your large multi-track session. The simple yet powerful Waves interface keeps this plugin in the easy-to-make-your-track sound good zone. Make sure to experiment with the included factory presets to give you an idea of what setting combinations that you like, and then make sure to save your presets for later use. For other related information on dynamics processing, make sure to check out the C1 and C4 movie tutorials in this CSI environment. C1 compressor gate is a high-quality stereo dynamics processor and what Waves calls a parametric compander. It also has a dynamic filtering processor that can perform many audio duties such as sweetening a mix or fixing a mix with sound quality issues. Waves breaks this plugin down into these instances: C1 comp, C1 gate, and the C1 comp and sidechain. The three main components of C1 are the compressor expander module, the gate expander module, and the filter module. The compressor expander module has the ability to operate as a high-level compressor, a gentle high-level expander, or as a mid-level compressor that can be tuned to any desired signal level. It also has a cancellation dynamics mode, allowing the cancellation of very high-level sounds. The gate expander module operates as a normal full-featured gate or expander and can also be used to take low-level signals and compress them upward. The filter module can perform conventional sidechain dynamics processing as well as their unique band-split dynamic EQ mode, which allows compression, expansion, or gating of any particular band. C1 has many instances depending on the platform you are using. We will be using the comp gate instance for our demo. Let's check out the controls. First, let's look at the compression controls. Notice the gain reduction meter that displays a real-time visual for the compression expansion processing. Be aware of where the 0 dB marker is on the meter. Below the meter is a numerical field for infinite peak hold for the reduction or expansion. You can click anywhere on the meter display to reset this value. Above the meter is the bypass button. You should use this frequently to listen to your dynamic processing compared to the original source audio. The compressor control level meter also has a peak hold field below it that is reset just like all other Waves meters by clicking anywhere on the meter or field. The threshold grab marker is an easy way to control the point at which the compression begins. Watch the level meter and adjust the threshold marker while, more importantly, using your ears to judge your processing decisions. Low ref or low-level reference mode simulates the behavior of conventional compressors. Lowering the threshold causes the signal level to drop as more gain reduction occurs. Use peak ref mode or peak level reference mode if you want to keep levels approximately the same. When you lower the threshold, the output gain increases. Makeup gain is the conventional output of the compressor module used to compensate for gain reduction processing. The threshold adjusts the level at which the soft knee compression or expansion begins. There are 5 ways to adjust the threshold. You can click and drag the marker in the input-output graph left or right. You can also click and drag the marker next to the compression control level meter up or down. You can click and drag up or down in the marker box next to the threshold field window. Lastly, you can click and drag up or down in the field window or enter values directly into it with the keypad. The ratio control is next, and it controls the amount of compression or expansion applied to the signal. A setting of 1:1 equals no compression, whereas a setting of 50:1 equals a soft-kneed limiter. Ratios ranging from 0.5 to 1:1 produce high-level expansion. Ratios higher than 50:1 are displayed as negative values between -50:1 and 5:1. This mode is called cancellation mode and is used literally for canceling out very loud signals while retaining quiet ones. This is explained in more detail in the PDF user guide included with your plugin purchase. To change the ratio, you can click and drag in the field, enter the value in with the keypad, or use the up-down arrow keys for more accurate settings. The attack control is shown in milliseconds and adjusts the time it takes for the compression expansion to begin once the threshold is crossed. The release control, also shown in milliseconds, adjusts the time it takes for the compression expansion to cease and the signal return to its unaffected state. It ranges from 1 millisecond to 10 seconds. The same method of data entry applies here as well. PDR, or Program Dependent Release, allows the release times to vary in reaction to the input signal. The same means to control the values apply here too. Higher settings are better for short-duration transient signals, and lower settings or a slower release is better for audio that has sustaining durations. Adaptive release control is a very powerful tool for a variety of dynamics processing needs. The EQ mode switch has 3 modes: wideband, sidechain, and split. When using wideband mode, it operates as a standard or conventional compressor that affects all frequencies. When using sidechain mode, the audio signal chosen to feed the sidechain input of this plugin is first routed through the filters in the EQ module. This allows for the dynamics to respond to a specifically defined range of frequencies. When using split mode, the sidechain audio is filtered, but the original signal is split into 2 different bands. The active band, shown in red on the graph, is the only band processed by the compression or expansion, whereas the passive band is not dynamically processed at all. This creates what Waves calls a dynamic EQ. Now let's look at the gate expander module controls. The bypass button should be used often to compare your processed and original signals. The gate expander button switches the modes between gate and expander. The floor control is normally referred to as range in conventional gates and allows some amount of signal to remain and thus not muting it entirely. When it is set to infinity, no signal is left at low levels, and when gated, the signal is effectively muted. When it is set to 0, there is no gating or change of low levels. When set to positive values up to 12 dB, the low-level signal is actually increased. This creates a low-level compression effect, and the softer passages are actually made louder. Waves suggest that you use this in the soft knee expander mode. Expander mode allows the floor setting to go beyond the infinity setting and enter a cancellation mode. This is shown by a negative number followed by a capital N for negative polarity. The floor control is adjusted in the standard waves protocol. The two gate thresholds of C1 allow a smoother transition from the gate in and out setting. This can eliminate unwanted gating artifacts normally found in classic gates. Gate open is adjusted by the triangle marker in the input-output graph or the compressor control level meter, as well as the standard means of data entry. Gate close is adjusted in the identical fashion as the gate open control. Attack is next and adjusts the beginning response time of the gate expander effect. Release adjusts the ending response time for the gate expander effect. Hold adjusts the time in which the gate is guaranteed to stay open. The EQ mode switch, only used in sidechain instances, contains the same three selections as those earlier described in the compressor expander module. Some of the controls of this plugin are linkable between the compressor and gate modules, and they are the threshold and gate open controls, the attack controls, the release controls, and EQ mode. The filter module and display are next. The filter type button and pull down allow the selection of low pass, band pass, high pass, and band reject. Next is the frequency control, which you can adjust in the standard fashion of waves entry, as well as a marker in the graphic display. Drag it left or right to adjust the frequency, and up or down to adjust the Q. The Q control also has a data field for entry as well. The active or processed band is shown in red, and the passive band is shown in blue. The look-ahead control is based upon the attack time and allows the signal to be delayed slightly to react to incoming transients in such a way that there was less transient shape distortion that lead to unwanted gating artifacts. There is no reason not to use this feature. The input-output graph displays the input-output relationship for both the compression and gate modules. The input level is the horizontal scale and the output level is the vertical scale. The yellow curve shows the relationship of the output and input signals. Traveling along this curve is a small indicator for real-time level for the dynamic processing. Notice the gate open and close grab markers, which provide a convenient way to operate the gate using the graph display. There is also a compression threshold grab marker, which again makes it easier to adjust while visually monitoring the graphic display for peaks. Key mode allows one channel's signal strength to control the other's dynamics. This is called keying. A common application of this is ducking, where the gain of one signal is reduced when the other signal reaches the given threshold. I use this a great deal when producing a voiceover that is over music. The music signal can be reduced when the voice comes in, and it returns to normal when the voice ceases. An example of keyed gating would be gating a bass track with generally long notes triggered by a percussive or pulsing rhythmic track. The three key modes are stereo, left keys right, and right keys left. Next is the monitor switch. Click to toggle these buttons to three modes. Audio monitors the normal C1 output, including all processing. Sidechain monitors the equalized sidechain signal if either processor is in split or sidechain mode. When both processors are in wideband mode, the wideband audio sidechain signal is heard. When in key mode, only the keyed signal is audible. Passive mode. If either processor is in split mode, this selection monitors the unprocessed band. This is useful when de-essing or filtering noise from a signal. Lastly, let's check out the input and output level controls. The separate input control fields are a bonus when you need to fix a mix that is slightly stronger on one channel. Click and drag in these fields to change their values individually. Shift-click both of them to link your adjustment. The output fader allows you to adjust the global level of the plugin. Click and drag the fader or within the fields, or enter the value with a numeric keyboard. Next to this are the notorious infinite peak hold meters with value fields below and clip indicators above them. As per usual, you can click anywhere in the meter display to reset the peak hold values. If you thought this was a lot of information, make sure to check out the C1 user guide for more information that you will certainly find useful. Also, check out the C4 and L1 movie tutorials for other related information. C4 is an advanced multiband compressor that Waves calls a 48-bit double precision processor that is dithered to 24 bits. Originally designed for Digidesign TDM systems, it has now been released as a native plugin due to the increased power of current computers. C4 has a unique dynamic line display that shows the actual gain change as an EQ display, and the gain reduction metering function has been merged with the crossover display. The interface is very intuitive, which helps for a processor that is this powerful. For example, you can process EQ, expand and de-ess in separate bands simultaneously, eliminating the need for multiple split-band compressors with one plugin. Let's think of it as a multi-band dynamic EQ. Waves has created a phase-compensated crossover. This helps avoid unwanted coloration while the gains of different bands are moved independently. With many multiband designs, this caused phase pitch shifting artifacts that unpleasantly colored the sound. While you can use C4 as a de-esser, it can also help mixes in instances where you can remix if what you have is less than desirable. A bad mix should be remixed, but sometimes extreme mastering can pull together a mixed project. Let's check out the controls. In the graphic window, there are 4 band center markers representing each band. They can adjust 3 parameter values simultaneously. Dragging horizontally adjusts the frequency center for the band. Dragging vertically will change the gain for the band. Dragging vertically while holding the Option or Alt key changes the range. On Macs, you can lock into a single direction control by holding the Command key. This helps avoid unwanted parameter adjustment. The individual 4-band controls are underneath the main display area. Each band has a solo button shown as S, allowing you to listen to each individual band post-processing. Next is the bypass, allowing you to return the selected band to unity gain without processing. The range dictates the maximum gain change for each band. Negative values make it a compressor. Positive values make the band into an upward or downward expander. A setting of 0 has no dynamic change to the band, and C4 then can be used as an EQ. Since there is no ratio control range, the threshold and knee settings allow variances in the ratio. The gain control is the output level for the selected band. This can also be called makeup gain. When the range is set to 0, it is merely the gain control for the band. The attack and release controls are typical to most compressors in that they control how quickly the dynamic processing reacts to the start of the signal and when it lets go of it. The release time utilizes Waves' ARC auto-release technology originally developed in the Renaissance compressor. Threshold controls the point at which the selected band responds dynamically to the signal. The threshold for C4 represents the center of the range value. If range is -10 dB, then the threshold is -5 dB. Next to the band controls is the global control section. First is the master threshold, gain, range, attack and release controls. These adjust all 4 of the bands simultaneously. The release button chooses ARC auto release control for the most transparent release behavior or manual release settings. The behavior button toggles between electro and opto settings. Electro is a compressor attribute invented by Waves, which exhibits slow release times at high gain reduction settings and progressively faster release times as it approaches zero gain reduction. Opto is the inverse of electro. This emulates the opto-coupled compressors of yesteryear, which used light-sensitive resistors to control the amount of compression. They usually exhibit fast release times at high gain reduction and slow release times as it gets closer to zero gain reduction. Let's put C4 on a mix and take a test drive. C4 is a very high-quality mastering plugin capable of adjusting the dynamic and frequency response of audio in a wide variety of applications. Used in mastering, it can tame a brash mix with no low end, or be used to filter some unwanted noise that found its way into the mix. Make sure to check out the accompanying user guide for extra insight into this powerful plugin. A de-esser is a processor designed to lessen high-frequency S sounds in voice and other sources, such as cymbals, etc. The S sounds that we wish to eliminate due to their harsh and sometimes distorted nature are easily attenuated by the Renaissance de-esser. Renaissance de-esser is the combination of a compressor with sidechain filter that can detect the energy in just the high-frequency bands instead of full bandwidth energy. This enables the compressor to affect only the high frequencies we intend to attenuate. Let's check out the controls. The threshold slider sets the point at which the de-esser begins to act upon the signal. It is adaptive to allow a more natural sounding effect. It is also different than the classic threshold found on compressors. Instead, this threshold defines the sensitivity in which the de-esser acts upon the signal. Lower threshold settings cause de-esser to reach its maximum S attenuation due to higher sensitivity. Higher thresholds have a lower sensitivity and cause the attenuation to be more dynamic. The maximum attenuation can only be achieved when there are loud peaks in the source audio signal. The range controls the actual amount of gain reduction allowed. It ranges from 0 to -48 dB. Check out the graphic display when you adjust this parameter. The frequency control can either be a high-pass or band-pass style filter. This value sets the corner frequency for the high-pass filter or the center frequency for a band-pass style filter. The type button toggles between high-pass and band-pass style filters used for detection and split-mode compression. The mode button toggles between wideband or split. Split mode divides the signal into two frequency bands with a crossover. In split band mode, the compression can be applied to high frequencies only, with the lows unaffected. In wideband mode, the compression is applied to the whole frequency spectrum of the source signal. The monitor button toggles monitoring between the audio output of the plugin or just the sidechain information. Monitoring the sidechain can be helpful in hearing and eliminating only the appropriate frequencies of the signal. The Renaissance de-esser graph shows real-time visual representation of the plugin's activity. Frequencies are on the x-axis. Gain is shown on the y-axis. The cyan line represents the sidechain or active range of the crossover filter. The red line represents the passive range of the crossover. The yellow line represents the frequency-dependent attenuation. The transparent purple shaded line represents the gain attenuation range. Click on the attenuation peak-hold display to reset it for proper monitoring of your settings. The output meters have numerical peak-hold indicators at the bottom and clip indicators at the top. Since de-esser can only attenuate the signal, there should rarely be clipping. If so, check the level of the original signal. Let's check out Renaissance de-esser on a vocal track that is too sibilant when I applied enough high-frequency boosts to make it pop through the mix. There are two ways of using Renaissance de-esser. The first is load one of the specific factory presets and adjust it to taste. The second involves using the sidechain to focus on the problematic frequency. This is what we are going to do with the sibilant vocal track. Click Sidechain in the monitoring section. Now let's adjust the frequency control so we can definitely hear the troublesome frequency in the vocal. This is normally found between 4 and 7 kHz. Make sure that you have it set so none or very few of the less offensive frequencies from the vocal track are audible. Select Audio Monitor and you should hear de-essing already, due to the fact that the threshold is adaptive. Let's try some further adjustments to become more familiar with the controls.
When you're right, I believe this time you're right. When you're right, I believe this time. Even when you told me twice, I was so sure you were wrong, but I should have taken your advice. You would say, and I should say, everywhere we find the fence, in a world that didn't make sense, made a habit of mine. So I'm here asking why, when you're right, I believe this time you're right. Even when you told me twice, I was so sure you were wrong, but I should have taken your advice. You would say, and I should say, everywhere we find the fence, in a world that didn't make sense, made a habit of mine. So I'm here asking why, when you're right, I believe this time you're right.
Renaissance de-esser is a very capable de-esser, but it can also be used to tame a loud hi-hat in a finished mix without sacrificing sonic quality through the use of ordinary EQ. Our example of a vocal track that needs to be brighter, but when compressed and EQ'd it became too sibilant, is also a common use. It is possible to go over the top with de-essing, and if you can hear the de-essing or it doesn't sound natural, chances are that you went too far with it. Make sure to check out the C1 and C4 movie tutorials in this CSI environment for related information. L1 is a limiter, level maximizer, and high-quality digital requantizing plugin that can be used in a variety of tracking and mastering applications. The requantization is achieved using an instance of Michael Gerzon's IDR, or Increased Digital Resolution, noise-shaped redithering process. Though the technical level of algorithm control is deep, the graphic user interface is elegantly simple. First, a bit about IDR. This redithering process offers 2 dither types and 3 noise-shaping curves for processing a wide variety of audio applications. This requantization is for all bit depths, including 24, 20, 16, 12, and 8-bit outputs. IDR prevents the loss of critical low-level detail in an audio signal once it has been digitally processed, even with a plugin. L1 as a limiter is very powerful due to its ability to look ahead at the audio signal and adjust the attack time accordingly to offer a very fast response that is free from any overshoot. It's truly a brick wall limiter that should in most cases be used last in the signal chain, whether used on an individual track or across the mix bus during mixdown or mastering. The usual function for L1 is to limit the transient peaks without audible artifacts normally caused by conventional compressors and limiters. You can use up to 6 dB of reduction before hearing the artifacts of the limiter. You can then use the output ceiling fader to set the ceiling for the brick wall limiting imparted by L1. Note, most host applications support 2 instances of L1, and they are the L1 limiter, mono or stereo, which is a wideband limiter without IDR, and plus L1 Ultra Maximizer, which is the full plugin with limiter and all IDR options. We will be showing the plus L1 Ultra Maximizer instance. Let's check out the controls. On the left are the input level controls. Our example involves a stereo mix. The 2 faders are independent in case you have a mix that has a balance problem. To link the 2, simply click and drag over both fader knobs, or simply click between the faders and they will respond equally. You can even drag up or down between the faders to adjust the stereo input level. To unlink, simply click on the outside of either fader knob. Next is the threshold level control, which sets the level at which the limiter is engaged. Simply click and drag one of the handles or drag up or down between the 2 triangle handles to adjust the threshold. You can also adjust it by clicking in the field above the faders and entering the value with the keyboard, cursor arrows, or click and drag up or down with the mouse. Make sure to watch your level indicators while relying mainly upon your ears to adjust this parameter. If you click on the level indicators, the peak indicators located below them will be reset. Notice, with a fixed output ceiling, the threshold, when lowered, actually increases the level of the audio signal. Next is the control for the output ceiling. Here we can set the maximum output for our audio signal as high as digital 0. I like to back this off a half dB or so when mastering CDs for that just-in-case factor, and this is explained in your comprehensive Waves user guides that accompany your plugins. There are also level indicators with handy peak indicators below them as well. Like the threshold control, the out ceiling has a field above the faders where we can use the keyboard, arrows, or mouse to adjust it. Next is the attenuation level indicator with gain reduction indicator above it. Simply click on the level indicator to reset the gain reduction value. You will find yourself clicking this indicator often. Next is the release control. It controls the amount of time it takes for the limiter to let go of the signal. Next are the controls for IDR. Bit depth is first, and as previously mentioned, there are settings for 24, 20, 16, 12, and 8-bit outputs. This covers most available delivery formats to which we might deliver our mixes. Next is the IDR type. The settings are Type 1, Type 2, and none. Type 1 is designed for no nonlinear distortion or modulation at low levels. It combines optimal dither noise with psychoacoustic noise shaping. It is commonly used for CD mastering and should be only used once, as, if it is applied multiple times in succession, it may produce unwanted audio artifacts. Type 2 also uses dither with a similar noise shaping curve. It adds less noise to the signal, but only at the expense of some low-level distortion. Great for audio that might be converted to 8-bit 44.1 kHz for multimedia work or transmitting over the internet. Next are the noise shaping controls to reduce the audibility of the added dither noise. Moderate, normal, and ultra are the settings. Moderate is mainly used for 8 or 12-bit files, but it can also be used to affect 16-bit files as well. Normal is the standard recommendation for most users and all bit depths. Ultra is a high-quality setting that should only be used in the last stage of digital processing. Later editing or processing may experience some side effects such as digital clicks and pops. That is not to say that it's not possible to use this setting. Lastly, the domain control can be toggled between digital and analog. This addresses some of the limits posed by end-user playback devices with cheap or poor digital audio converters. Sometimes the increased levels made possible by L1 aren't accepted so well by these devices, and some of them even clip the signal during playback. The digital domain setting is for the absolute end of the line, and no extra conversion or processing will occur after this stage. Change the setting to analog to protect against this problem of bad digital audio converters in case your CD will be played on a variety of playback systems. Let's adjust L1 as a mastering limiter assigned to the stereo mix bus. Remember, option clicking any of the controls returns it to the default setting. As you can see, the effective use of L1 can be a powerful tool in controlling the dynamics of your audio files. For additional detailed definitions and operational tips on L1, make sure to check out the Waves user guide. For related information, check out the L2 plugin tutorials included on the CD-ROM. L2 is a high-quality limiter, level maximizer, and high-quality digital requantizing plugin that can be used in a variety of tracking and mastering applications. The requantization is achieved using an instance of Michael Gerzon's IDR, or Increased Digital Resolution, 9th-order noise-shaped redithering process. Though the technical level of algorithm control is deep, the graphic user interface is elegantly simple. L2 includes Waves' ARC, or Auto Release Control System, previously explained in the Renaissance Compressor movie tutorial. First, a bit about IDR. This redithering process offers 2 dither types and 3 noise-shaping curves for processing a wide variety of audio applications. This requantization is for all bit depths, including 24, 22, 20, 18, and 16-bit outputs. IDR prevents the loss of critical low-level detail in an audio signal once it has been digitally processed, even with a plugin. L2 is a stereo-only plugin, and a mono signal must be bused to a stereo aux to be used with it. L2 as a limiter is very powerful due to its ability to look ahead of the audio signal and adjust the attack time accordingly to offer a very fast response that is free from any overshoot. It is truly a brick wall limiter that should in most cases be used last in the signal chain, whether used across the mix bus during mixing or mastering. The usual function for L2 is to limit the transient peaks without audible artifacts normally caused by conventional compressors and limiters. You can apply liberal amounts of reduction before hearing the artifacts of the limiter. You can then use the output ceiling fader to set the ceiling for the brick wall limiting imparted by L2. Let's check out the controls. L2 is divided into basically two sets of controls: the limiter control section and the IDR control section. Since L2 is a look-ahead limiter, there is no attack control. It automatically analyzes each sample and responds dynamically according to the audio signal fed through it. The threshold control is similar to standard limiters in that it chooses the level in which the limiter begins processing the incoming signal. When you leave the out ceiling fixed at the maximum value, 0 dB digital, and lower the threshold, you will notice that the signal will get louder. Most music has transient peaks, and using the limiter in L2 to affect these peaks is a great way to increase the overall output of the mastered audio. Click on the provided slider with value field and drag up or down on it or anywhere between the stereo input meters to adjust the threshold. You can also in Wave Standard Protocol type the threshold value directly into the field. Also, the input meters are the standard infinite peak hold style with peak fields below, and as per usual you can click anywhere in the meter area to reset the peak hold setting. Next is the out ceiling fader and output peak meter display. It sets the final ceiling output level for the processed audio. The maximum setting is digital 0. Being a brick wall limiter, there will be no overshoot and you should be able to leave this set at 0. I like to set this down a half dB or so just for those old inexpensive CD players that may be playing my mastered product. Sometimes they have inexpensive digital to analog converters that can be digitally clipped with an extremely strong signal. Adjust this control in the same fashion as the threshold control. Note, you can link the threshold and output ceiling by dragging in the arrow marker between them as shown. The release control is next, and you should engage the ARC button at all times that you aren't trying to achieve a pumping or distorted sound from the limiter. It automatically adjusts the release time based upon the dynamics and speed of incoming audio. I generally deselect the ARC button and approximate my release time range with the fader, and then select ARC again. You can also type in the value when ARC mode is disabled. Lastly is the attenuation meter that is a peak hold style like all other Waves meters, and is also reset in the same fashion. Here is where you will visually monitor the amount of reduction to your audio. Make sure to use your ears for the final judgment of processing. Next are the controls for IDR. Bit depth is first, and as previously mentioned, there are settings for 24, 22, 20, 18, and 16-bit outputs. This covers most available delivery formats to which we might deliver our mixes. Next is the IDR type. The settings are Type 1, Type 2, and none. Type 1 is designed for no nonlinear distortion or modulation at low levels. It combines optimal dither noise with psychoacoustic noise shaping. It is commonly used for CD mastering and should only be used once, as if it is applied multiple times in succession, it may produce unwanted audio artifacts. Type 2 also uses dither with a similar noise shaping curve. It adds less noise to the signal, but only at the expense of some low-level distortion. It will be a judgment call to choose between Type 1 or Type 2. Next are the noise shaping options to reduce the audibility of added dither noise. Moderate, normal, ultra, and none. Moderate is mainly used for 8 or 12-bit files, but can also be used to affect 16-bit files too. Normal is the standard recommendation for most uses and all bit depths. Ultra is a high-quality setting that should only be used in the last stage of digital processing. Later editing and processing may experience some side effects such as digital clicks and pops. This doesn't mean that it's not possible to use this setting. None chooses no noise shaping added to the signal processing. Let's increase the overall level while limiting some of the transient peaks of a song we are mastering with L2. Make sure to A/B the mastering process.
Spoke to me the other day, and a devil did the same. The angel told me to kneel down and pray. The devil said don't play his game. Well, I took my time, then I said I don't really listen. Speeches from the dead. I got my mind to use instead. I only reason with the light that shines inside my head. A crazy psychic lady called to me. I know your birthday and your name. She said there's trouble in your future.
Make sure to check out the movie tutorial for L1 Ultra Maximizer for related info, as well as the user guides that came with your plugins for more useful and technical info on L2.
Speeches from the dead. I got my mind to use instead. I only reason with the light that shines.
The Linear Multiband plugin is a new improved version of C4. If you have used C4 or checked out the CSI movie tutorial for it, you will be tweaking in no time. Like C4, it is mainly used for mastering audio, but it can be used for production tasks, such as de-essing and other forensic tasks, like noise filtering. The Linear Multiband includes 5 bands in which we can control the gain and dynamics in order to compress, EQ, expand, or limit the signal discretely from the other bands. The linear phase crossovers are transparent when not in use and provide only delay without any phase coloration. Automatic makeup and gain trim are also options of this plugin. Wave's patented adaptive threshold creates a very transparent form of multiband processing. Let's check out the controls. First, we will cover the crossovers, which are shown in the graph and in the fields directly beneath the graphic window. Here is where we define the cutoff frequencies for the 5 discrete bands from the wideband signal. You can also grab the graphic handles to change the crossover points. The low crossover range is 40 Hz to 350 Hz. The low-mid crossover range is 150 Hz to 3 kHz. The high-mid crossover range is from 1 kHz to 8 kHz. And the high crossover range is 4 kHz to 16 kHz. Note, while adjusting the crossover points, you will not hear a smooth sweep, as the intent is to set the cutoff frequency. When using the mouse, the processing will not update until the mouse is released to avoid zipper noise. There is some heavy calculation going on. Using the arrow keys to adjust the crossover fields yields the best results, as the processing is updated upon each press of the key. Next are the individual band controls. For each band, there are the following controls. Threshold sets the level where the dynamics processing will begin. Gain can be used to control the band as an EQ if there is no compression or expansion applied. Range. Negative range values mean compression when the threshold is crossed. Positive range values mean that the signal will be boosted from the level of threshold. Attack sets the time it takes for the dynamics processing to begin. Release sets the time it takes for the dynamics processing to cease and the signal to return to its unattenuated state. The solo mutes all other bands other than the soloed band in order to perform some fine tweaking. Multiple solos can be active for listening to a few bands at once. And bypass, which should be used liberally to compare your processed and unprocessed audio. These controls are very similar to standard dynamics processors, except we have 5 at one time. The ratio control has been replaced by the range control. It simultaneously controls the intensity of the gain change as well as the limit for the gain change. The global section has global controls for the individual band controls. These are controlled by the drag markers under the word master. The other global controls are as follows. The auto trim button updates the peak value, and when clicked it makes up the difference of the present level and full scale digital 0. If it reads -2, then when clicked it will provide exactly 2 dB of makeup gain. If clipping occurs, the light will illuminate, and when clicked the level will be reduced the difference to full scale digital 0. Dither adds a small amount of noise that can be switched on in the final mastering stage in order to minimize low-level distortion due to DSP processing and bit truncation. For additional detailed info on setting the dither control, make sure to check out page 12 of the PDF user guide. Makeup is the global control for all the band's gain, also called makeup gain. It can be set to auto or manual. Next is the adaptive threshold. We are sensitive to the fact that loud audio signals can mask softer ones, and loud low-frequency sounds mask soft higher frequencies. With linear multiband, Wave considers each lower band the masker of the band above it, and using adaptive threshold mode allows the threshold for the band of the loud or impulsive masking audio to be lifted momentarily in order to prevent it from being too limited and also masking the frequency content above it. A detailed coverage of adaptive thresholds is beyond the scope of this tutorial, but for a more in-depth and theoretical explanation, refer to Chapter 3 of the PDF user guide. The global release setting alternates between manual or ARC, Wave's auto-release technology, which enables the processing to be used liberally due to its transparency. The behavior button switches between opto and electro. Opto has been derived from the classic opto-coupled circuit compressors that used light-sensitive resistors to control the amount of compression. It is good for heavy use and has faster release times at higher compression and slower release times as the gain reduction approaches 0. The electro setting is a Wave's invention that is pretty much the inverse of opto, in that when the gain reduction meter gets closer to 0 gain reduction, the faster it responds. Great for mastering applications. The knee setting ranges from 0, soft, to 1, hard. Hard knee settings should be used for limiter applications and softer knee settings for compressor use. The output meters are next, and by now you know the drill that these are peak hold meters with clip indicators above and level status fields below them. Click anywhere in the region to reset the peak hold values. Click and drag in the value field or on or around the output fader to adjust the final output of the plugin. Remember, Option or Alt clicking on any control returns it to its default setting. Let's check out linear multiband on a mix to become more familiar with its controls.
1, 2, 3, 4. I said, now what you say is going all around town. The people say you're gonna put the kid down. Oh yeah. Well, look at what you did. You can call it what you want. I call it messing with the kid. Well, the kid's no child, and the kid always plays. But I mean what I say. Call it what you want. I call it messing with the kid. Baby, tell me that you love me. And tell me a lie. You know I'm gonna love you till the day I die. Oh yeah. Look at what you did. You can call it what you want, but I call it messing with a kid.
Linear multiband is a remarkably powerful multiband dynamics and EQ processor that is used commonly in the mastering process, but can also be used to affect individual tracks, such as de-essing, noise filtering, and other processes. As you tweak the plugin, make sure you save your presets for later retrieval.
Take my car, baby, drive around town. Tell everybody, we'll put this kid down. Oh no, well look at what you did. You can call it what you want. I called it messing with the kid.
The Renaissance compressor expander takes inspiration from the classic tube compressors of yesteryear. Like all of Wave's plugins, its user interface is elegant and simple. Let's check it out. At the top of the plugin window, there are 3 buttons. The Release Mode button toggles between ARC, Wave's patented auto-release technology, and Manual. ARC is similar to very responsive vintage program compressors, but also works well on individual tracks. Use the release time as an overall scaling factor, and ARC will modify it from there depending on the input signal. Manual mode deselects auto release mode. The Behavior Mode button toggles between opto and electro. Opto and electro have different release time behaviors. Opto is more suited to use on drums due to its vintage emulation. Electro produces a noticeable change in RMS, or average level. It's great for vocals and adding impact to certain styles of music. The gentle character control toggles between warm and smooth. Warm adds low-frequency harmonics as greater compression is applied. Smooth does not add these harmonics, keeping true to the original source. Nicely located next to the input meter is the control for threshold, which selects at which level the compressor begins to affect the signal. Note that Renaissance compressor is a soft knee compressor, and compression or expansion really begins 3 decibels below the threshold. The ratio adjusts the compression or expansion ratio for signal above the threshold. It is located beside the gain meter. Adjust this slider to adjust the depth of compression or expansion. The attack setting controls the response time for the onset of compression or expansion. The release setting in milliseconds controls the release characteristic. When ARC mode is engaged, it acts as an overall scaling factor around which the ARC technology works. When manual mode is selected, the slider adjusts the rate at which the compressor stops reacting to the signal. The gain control can also be thought of as makeup gain and controls the overall output of the plugin. The gain meter shows the increase or reduction in signal in real time. When compressing, the signal will be yellow in color and negative on the meter. When expanding, it will be blue and positive in value. The input-output meters have peak hold values at the bottom of each meter. Click on the actual meters to reset these peak values. The final feature is the limiter, which is shown above the input-output meter as a simple light indicator. The Renaissance compressor has an L1 style limiter at the output stage and is activated only when the level exceeds digital 0. As more limiting happens, the display will become brighter yellow. If it becomes red, then limiting is very heavy, at 6 decibels or more. Let's check it out on a track. Renaissance Compressor is a very useful tool in controlling the dynamics of tracks, mixes, or masters. Combined with an L1 style limiter, Renaissance Compressor is a great choice for controlling peaks and emulating the old vintage tube compressors. It can emulate compressors from the past and present. It's also a must that you check out the Waves user guide and its section explaining the different user presets available. Also, make sure to check out coolschoolonline.com for more movie tutorials and useful info for Waves and processing in general. The Renaissance Vocal Processor combines the technology from the Renaissance Compressor as well as C1 into a great sounding but extremely easy to use processor. Waves has created a high-quality plugin with only 2 controls. It also has mono and stereo instances. It's great for vocals but can also be used on many other sources such as bass, guitar, and any other source that could use some soft knee compression and subtle background noise reduction. In the first control, Waves has combined their compression and limiting technology into a single control with makeup gain built in. This automatically controls the dynamic range. The second control is a downward expander, which can clean up background noise in no time at all. Seeing that there are only 2 controls, let's check them out. The compression control ranges from 0 to -36. This controls the amount of compression while automatically adjusting the makeup gain. Use the fader or keypad entry. If you use keypad entry, the number must be preceded by a negative sign. Simply lower the compression fader to the desired level. As you lower it, the output volume will increase without clipping. Waves has also included a limiter on the output stage very similar to the Renaissance Compressor. The signal will not clip at the output, even using extreme compression. The blue meter shows input gain to aid in setting the compression and gate threshold parameters. The red meter shows the amount of gain reduction of the processor. This includes any reduction due to the downward expander gate section also. RVox compression uses a very soft knee, which is difficult to show with any style of sophisticated metering. You need to adjust this plugin, as well as every other plugin, relying mainly on your ears. The downward expander included in RVox is not your average gate. It has been optimized to apply a gentle and subtle style of background noise reduction. It can be considered a very soft-kneed gate, and, just like the compressor section, should be adjusted relying mainly upon your ears. Remember that the gate and compressor reduction meter are one and the same, so you may have constant activity here with certain settings. Even though there is no control for makeup gain, it can be shown by looking at the increased level at the output meter display. Like all Waves meters, RVox has infinite peak hold numeric indicators below the meters and can be easily reset by clicking anywhere in the meter display. RVox is truly easy to adjust, but here are a couple of tips before using, if you even made it this far in the tutorial before just tweaking away with reckless abandon. Number 1. Adjust the compression first. Adjust the level of the affected track in the mix. Finally, if gating is needed, apply the appropriate amount of downward expansion to the selected track, making sure to solo the track and use your ears to determine the proper setting. Let's use RVox to set a vocal track nicely in the mix with some subtle gating.
You got to help me, baby. I can't do this by myself. You got to help me, baby. I can't do this by myself. And if you don't help me, little darling, I got to use somebody else. Bring my nightshirt, put on your morning gown. Bring my nightshirt, baby, take off your morning gown. You know I don't feel like sleeping, baby. I could use some lying down. You gotta help me, baby. I can't do this by myself. You gotta help me, baby. I can't do this by myself. And if you don't help me, little darling, I got to use somebody else.
That was too easy. Enjoy taking your vocal sounds to the next level with minimal tweaking. Make sure to check out the movie tutorials for Wave's other compression and gating plugins, such as C1, C4, L1, and L2 in this CSI training environment. Wave's Audio Track is a plugin that combines a 4-band EQ with a compressor and a gate. It is an extremely efficient and great sounding plugin that you can apply with multiple instances depending upon your system due to its lean DSP appetite. The basic signal flow for Audio Track is the input fader, followed by the 4-band paragraphic EQ, then the compressor expander gate section, and then the output fader. Let's check out the controls. First is the input fader. This is useful in creating headroom for EQ filters, which can cause an already hot signal to digitally clip. Adjust it with the provided fader or value field above. Next is the EQ section. The 4-band paragraphic EQ has a handy graphic editing screen in addition to fields for changing the parameter values. First are the on-off buttons for each band filter. One is yellow, and notice that the graphic marker for the band in the graphic editing window highlights appropriately with your selection. Double-clicking the marker also toggles the filter on-off switch. Next is the filter type selection for each band. Band number 1 choices are bell, low shelf, high shelf, and high pass filter selections. Bands 2 and 3 have only the bell, low shelf, and high shelf filter selections. Band number 4 has bell, low shelf, high shelf, and low pass. Click on the filter type button to change its value or use the pull-down menu to switch filter selections. Used properly, the wide variety of EQ filter shapes can really add to the final clarity of a final master. Next is the gain control for each band. It ranges from plus or minus 18 dB. Drag the selected band marker up or down to adjust the gain. You can also click and drag in the value field or type values from the keyboard directly into this field. Next is the frequency control. Like the gain control, it can be controlled via the graphic marker in a left-right manner, dragging in the value field, or entering values with the keyboard. The bandwidth or Q control is next. Drag in the value window or enter the numbers with the keyboard to adjust the Q. Note, when you're using the graphic markers, you can also adjust the Q by holding the Option or Alt key and dragging left or right. This is really handy since with this simple modifier, we can control gain, frequency, and Q with the graphic interface. This makes sweeping to find problematic audio an easier task. You can hold Shift to select multiple bands or parameters to adjust them at the same time. It's easier just to click and drag around the particular controls that you want to group. Then, when you adjust one of them, the others will be altered in the same aspect. Next is the compressor expander section. The threshold control can be controlled by the marker next to the threshold meter or by clicking and dragging in the value field. You can also enter the value in the field via the keyboard. It controls at which level the compression or expansion begins. The ratio control displays either compression ratios of 1 to 40 or expansion ratio of 0.5 to 1. Click and drag in the field to change the ratio. You can type values directly into it, but remember the colon sign in between your number selections. This adjusts the amount of gain, increase, or reduction. The attack control determines how long it takes for the compression or expansion to begin once the threshold has been crossed. Slower attacks preserve transients, and faster attack times serve as better peak control. The release value adjusts the amount of time it takes for the signal to return to its original level previous to the compression or expansion effect. The gate section. The threshold sets the level that the gate engages upon the track to silence any signal below that level. You can adjust this with the blue triangle marker next to the threshold energy meter. You can also click and drag up or down in the value field to change the threshold for the gate. The floor sets the level of maximum attenuation of the gate. In other words, how far will the gate turn down the signal? This can be set to infinity, but sometimes this produces unnatural clicks and pop sounds while trying to eliminate background noise. Loosen up on the floor setting to retain some of the natural sound of the track if you are experiencing pops or other artifacts. The attack time sets the opening time for the gate after the signal passes the threshold. The release time sets the time it takes for the gate to fully engage. The output fader and meters are last. The output fader offers -24 dB in cut and 12 dB in boost with numeric field display above it. The output meters with clip indicators are reset simply by clicking anywhere on the meter display. Let's use AudioTrack to become more familiar with the controls.
I was so sure you were wrong, but I should have taken your advice. You would say, and I should say, everywhere we find the fence, in a world that didn't make sense, made a habit of mine. So I'm here asking why, when you're right, I believe this time you're right, when you're right, I believe this time success will cause some stress, living life in the city of sex, a fine line between, you would say and I should say, everywhere I find the wild, you want every what I wonder why you don't, made a habit of mine. So I'm here asking why, when you're right, I believe this time you're right.
As per usual, Option or Alt clicking on any control returns it to its default setting. I use this shortcut frequently. AudioTrack is a DSP saving way to have high-quality filter and dynamics processing on each channel of your large multi-track session. The simple yet powerful Waves interface keeps this plugin in the easy-to-make-your-track sound good zone. Make sure to experiment with the included factory presets to give you an idea of what setting combinations that you like, and then make sure to save your presets for later use. For other related information on dynamics processing, make sure to check out the C1 and C4 movie tutorials in this CSI environment. The Linear Phase EQ plugin was designed for precise equalization without any phase shifting. It is a real-time process with the Waves signature paragraphic interface found in Q10 and Renaissance EQ. When using standard analog and digital equalizers, we assume that when we are adjusting the gain of a particular band of frequencies, that all other frequencies remain unchanged. The levels of different frequencies are linear, but the phase relationships are not. It takes a highly trained ear to hear this phase distortion, and it usually is described in the higher frequencies as smearing. This is that the complex frequency content of transient sounds are affected by different amounts of delay or phase shift, and they seem to lose their sharpness and clarity. Waves created the linear phase EQ by delaying all frequency bands equally, therefore eliminating the phase shift between bands. This resulted in a much more pure-sounding EQ. I generally use it for my mastering projects as a very precise program equalizer. Let's check out the controls of the main broadband component. There are 6 phase linear EQ bands for tweaking pleasure. The first band, labeled LF, is low-frequency band ranging from 22 Hz to 1 kHz with single Hertz resolution. The other 5 operate in the frequency band from 258 Hz to nearly 22 kHz, with 87 Hz resolution, suited for high frequencies. The 5 main bands have a smooth operation of sweeping the frequency, gain, and Q, and hearing instant results. Due to intense computation, the low-frequency band requires you to release the mouse each time or enter a value to hear the changes. The cursor arrows work well here for very fine tuning of low frequencies. Each band has a control for gain, frequency, bandwidth, filter type, and on-off button. The low-frequency filter types are different from the other 5. It offers bell, low shelf, high shelf, low pass, and high pass filters. The main 5 bands have bell, resonant low shelf, V-slope low shelf, resonant high shelf, V-slope high shelf, resonant high pass, V-slope high pass, resonant low pass, and V-slope low pass. You can also control the gain by the markers in the frequency graph window by clicking and dragging up or down. Dragging left or right changes the frequency value. Holding Option or Alt and dragging left or right controls the bandwidth. Double-clicking on the marker turns the band on or off. You can click and drag around multiple markers to link your band's processing. Also, try highlighting several fields and linking them that way too. The output fader allows the reduction of overall plug-in volume. This is necessary when you intend to apply liberal EQ with strong peaks to the signal. Lower the gain fader to create the headroom you need for processing. The trim button automatically trims the specified margin between digital 0 and the peak audio signal. If you see the clip indicators light up, click the trim button to lower the output of the appropriate level before a similar reoccurring peak exceeds digital 0. The peak and hold output meters display a visual representation of audio level strength. Click anywhere to reset the peak hold fields. The Method Mode button selects between 3 methods: normal, accurate, and low ripple. In most applications, when we are boosting or cutting a signal plus or minus 12 dB, normal mode should be used. When we are using extreme settings, then we may want to consider the low ripple and accurate settings. These are slightly beyond the scope of this tutorial, but are covered in detail in Chapter 3 of the PDF User Guide. Toggle between them to use what sounds best. That is really the best way to use any plugin or processing. The dither button can be selected as on or off. The double precision 48-bit processing doesn't cause quantization errors, but the process of rounding back to 24-bit resolution at the output of the plugin may. Using requantizing noise shaping can restore low-level detail at the expense of some very slight hiss. Without the dither, there may be low-level quantization distortion, but it also is hard to hear and should be at the discretion of the engineer. Let's process a track to become more familiar with the controls. Linear phase EQ is a powerful EQ with precision control and pristine sound quality without phase distortion found in typical EQs. Make sure to check out the movie tutorials for Q10 and Renaissance EQ in this CSI environment. MaxBass is a plugin that creates harmonics that are added to the original signal. These harmonics trick the human ear into perceiving lower bass frequencies that may not have been present in the output of the original signal. We are definitely able to hear the bass guitar through small speakers even though they cannot physically reproduce the fundamental or main note being played. There are indeed harmonics or overtones from the bass guitar emanating from these small speakers, enabling us to hear the bass. Your ear interprets these overtones and your brain creates the missing fundamental note inside your head. This is a documented and well-known psychoacoustic phenomena that Waves uses liberally and gives you control of it. Speaking of controls, let's check them out. Since MaxBass splits the signal into high and low frequencies with a crossover, it analyzes the low frequency content only and generates a specific series of harmonics that can be mixed with the original bass. It can then be recombined with the high frequency content at the output. The MaxBass graph shows the frequency relationship of the original bass and the MaxBass signals. The frequency slider controls the split point of the crossover. The frequencies below this point will have harmonics created for them, and all others are sent to the output. Note, you can click and drag in the value field, use the left and right cursor arrows on the keyboard, or select the field and type in the new value to change the frequency parameter. The Input-Output section contains controls for the input level, original bass level, and MaxBass level. Below these are the monitor buttons. Audio is the normal mixed output. MaxBass is the low-frequency harmonics-only solo. The original bass is the original low-frequency solo. The harmonics section contains two controls. The high-pass filter toggle cuts low frequencies from the generated harmonics. There are 3 different curves. The decay controls the progressive rate of level decay for each succeeding harmonic. Higher values, near 0, yield richer harmonics, which affect large and small monitors differently. This may be great for creating better low-end and small speakers, but then sound blurred on a large system. Lower values may yield the opposite results. The dynamic section allows us to apply an upward compressor, and thus as the ratio is increased, the level of harmonics will also increase, yet with a decreased dynamic range. The response value window is represented in milliseconds, and it controls the attack and release of the generated harmonics. You will notice that faster times make the harmonics respond quicker. When using MaxBass as a mastering tool, it is best to set the input level around -6 dB as a starting point. This is due to the fact that MaxBass can create large increases in peak values. Use the peak and hold input meters to gauge your amount of headroom. Let's check out MaxBass on a mix. We will load and tweak a few presets while auditioning the original and generated harmonic bass signals.
Keep looking for that light to set me free. I'm not perfect. I'll take you. You give me something to hold on to.
Max Bass can add a smooth low end without muddying the mix or smearing the low end of instruments such as guitar, bass, and keyboards. Make sure to use your ears whether you're using it on an individual track or mastering some mixes with it. Sometimes EQ can be more appropriate, so make sure to use what sounds good. Also, a side note, in creating specialty mixes for, say, interactive games or educational products that will most likely be played over limited bandwidth systems, the Max Bass can become an invaluable tool in making your mixes stand out above the rest. For additional information on equalization, make sure to check out the Q10 movie tutorial. Q10 by Waves is a very powerful paragraphic equalizer. The user interface is similar to that of a standard fixed-band graphic equalizer, but each band has a Q or bandwidth control for substantial tone shaping capabilities. The bands are also stackable and unfixed or variable. Very few hardware equalizers have anything close to this kind of processing power. Let's go over the controls and their functions. At the lower left of the plugin window, you will see input level faders with dB clip indicators above them and phase reverse switches below. It is important to keep your gain stages in check to avoid digital distortion, especially when using multiple plugins that allow level changes to occur. Next to the level controls are the on-off button, which enable or disable the particular band of EQ. The next button is the filter type button, where you can select from 5 different filter types: band pass or bell curve, low shelf, high shelf, low pass, and high pass. This button is gain or amplitude for the particular band. You can click on the button and type directly into the field, or click and push up or down on the mouse to alter the gain for the particular filter band. The frequency button is next, and the same means of adjusting the gain applies here. You can type in an exact value or sweep the frequency band manually with the mouse by clicking and dragging left or right. Next is the Q or bandwidth button, which allows us to adjust the width of the bell curve for the particular filter band. Click and drag left or right to adjust the Q or type the value directly into the button field. To the right of the Q control are the output faders, also with clip indicators and a trim field, which when clicked increases the output faders to the amount shown in the field. Next are the output level displays with clip indicators and left, right, and link controls below. Since we are using a stereo instance of Q10, we can create a separate EQ curve for channel A and B, or choose to link and affect them the same. The frequency graph is directly above the previously described buttons. Here, visual data is displayed based upon the settings. We can also control the gain, frequency, and bandwidth. Simply use the mouse to click and drag the EQ points on the graphic display. Dragging up and down controls gain or amplitude, and dragging from side to side controls the frequency selection. The bandwidth can be controlled graphically by holding the Option key on Macs and Alt key on PCs while dragging left or right with the mouse. You will notice that the filter curve will change shape when doing so. This numeric interface is a really great feature, allowing us to EQ by ear and sight rather than strictly by numerical values. The buttons directly above the graphic window include Undo, Setup AB, Copy to B, Load, Save, and Flat. Undo reverses the last adjustment to Q10. Setup AB is a great feature unique to Waves products. You can have 2 completely different settings dialed in and AB them with one click. The Copy to B button is useful to preserve one setting while experimenting on the B version of it. The Load button allows us to load from factory or user-defined presets. The Save button allows us to save our custom settings for later recall. Flat resets Q10 to a flat or zeroed out setting. For our example, we will take a vocal track and process it with Q10. Let's load a preset. Click on Load and choose Telephone. This is one of my favorite presets for many different purposes. This can also be useful in sound design for film or TV.
I I wonder, am I making myself
Note,
clear?
hitting the Tab key will toggle through the settings, and shift clicking will allow you to select multiple bands so that you can adjust group bands at one time.
Can't help it.
It's always wise to check out some of the Waves factory presets while reading the accompanying user guides to gain greater understanding of the plugin's potential uses. Q10 can be used to gently EQ an instrument sound or to surgically remove unwanted frequencies in a crucial dialogue track for broadcast. Make sure to check out all of the plugin movies available at Cool School Online. Renaissance Bass took patented technology used in Wave's original Max Bass plugin and created a newer, more advanced plugin that is clip-free, provides a new level of sound quality, and has a simpler interface. For the additional background history of Max Bass and a more detailed discussion of the psychoacoustic processing being used, check out the Waves user guide that came with your plugins. In a nutshell, smaller speakers can't produce the fundamental bass frequencies as well as large ones. Most people listen to small speakers. Therefore, Renaissance Bass has been designed to add the fundamental back into a track or mix by mixing in the harmonics based upon the low frequencies present in the sound. This allows for the reproduction of fundamental frequencies seemingly impossible by utilizing the harmonics found above the fundamental low bass notes. Let's check out the controls. On the left is a meter for the original bass level contained in the source audio. In the middle is a meter for the level of harmonics created by Renaissance Bass. On the right side is the output meter with the standard peak hold numbers below the meters. As per usual, all meters have infinite peak hold numbers at the bottom. These can be reset by clicking anywhere in the meter region. The in-out control includes or excludes only the original bass audio at the output of the plugin. The intensity control ranges from -24 to +24 and is merely a level control for the generated bass harmonics. 0 is not a recommended starting point, only a middle point between the two extreme settings. If the original bass were to be switched out, a setting of 0 would roughly approximate an equal bass level. Make sure to use your ears to set this appropriately. The frequency control is very similar to a crossover in that it determines where the processing begins based upon frequency. For example, 80 Hz, the frequency shown presently, would mean the signals containing 80 Hz and below will generate harmonics that can be added with the intensity control. Lastly is the output fader, allowing us to lower the overall output level of the plugin to keep from clipping the signal processing downstream of Renaissance Bass. Let's check it out on a mix that was a little thin. Renaissance Bass is a unique plugin that takes the Max Bass technology to the next level by providing additional warmth and smoothness. The interface is easy to use and can really bring back the substance of a track or mix that needs a little help. Make sure to check out the movie tutorial from MaxBass for related information. Renaissance EQ is a 2, 4, or 6-band audiophile equalizer plugin that may include mono, dual mono, and stereo implementations depending upon which platform and software you are using. Renaissance EQ is a very powerful and musical EQ based on some pretty heavy math and research by Pultec, Michael Gerzon, and others. Make sure to read the accompanying user guide for Renaissance EQ since it contains important information along with tips, tricks, and preset descriptions. Let's check out the controls. There are 3 main sections to Renaissance EQ. The individual filter band section. The small boxes and buttons below the frequency curve display are value windows for gain, frequency, and Q for each individual band. There is also an in-out button and filter type button for each band. The gain can be adjusted by dragging the EQ curve in the graphic display or by clicking in the gain value window. Once selected, you can type the values directly into the field. Use the up-down cursor arrows for most accuracy, or click and drag up and down or left and right to change these values. Frequency can be controlled in a similar manner. It displays the center frequency for each band when a bell filter is selected, and when in cut or shelf modes, it controls the corner frequency of the filter. If you click and drag, make sure to only use left-right direction, as dragging up or down will not yield satisfactory results. The Q displays the bandwidth or Q value, which will function differently for each filter type available. For the bell filter, Q represents the width of frequency range for that band. For the shelf filter, the Q controls the slope of the side of the shelf and the resonant dips and peaks. For the cut filter, bands 1 and 6 only, the Q controls the slope of the cut filter, from 10 dB per octave to 18 dB per octave. It also controls the bump in the slope further explained in the Waves user guide. It is controlled in the same manner as the frequency and gain controls. Click and drag, use the cursor arrows, or enter the numbers directly into the value windows. Below this are 2 rows of toggle buttons, the bottom being the in-out button for each band, and above this is the filter type button. Make sure to note that the filter selections are not the same for all 6 bands. Bands 1 and 6 have 3 selections: bell curve, high shelf filter, or low pass filter. Bands 2 and 3 have 2 selections: bell curve or low shelf filter. Bands 4 and 5 also have 2 selections: bell curve and high shelf filter. These filter selections can be made as shown by the pull-down menu for some software programs and the default method of clicking on the toggle switch. The master section. Since Renaissance EQ uses 48-bit processing to create headroom that avoids internal clipping between bands, it doesn't need input faders or meters and simply has a master output control. The instance that we are using is stereo, so there are 2 output faders with toggles for left, right, or link. Most stereo situations require identical processing of left and right signals, and for these instances, we will use the link button. If for some reason we wanted to treat the left and right channels differently with Renaissance EQ, we can simply deselect the link button. Then, click on either the left or right button and make our adjustments. We could also link the bottom 3 bands, make mutual adjustments for them, and then deselect link to treat the upper bands differently for left and right channels. The output faders are also affected by the link controls. The meters have peak and hold indicators below them, and a peak indicator above them signifying that the signal has reached digital 0. Above them is the trim button, which is calibrated in decibels and is useful in avoiding clipping as well as using available headroom. If the number in the window is a positive, such as 3.2 dB, it means that we have 3.2 dB of headroom and are able to move the faders up 3.2 dB without digital clipping. If the number is negative, such as minus 2.5 dB, it means that the fader level needs to be decreased by 2.5 dB. The slick thing is that in either case, clicking in the trim window will automatically trim the faders in the appropriate direction. If clipping 2.5 dB, it will trim this amount. To reset the trim window, simply click in the fader meter region. If you clicked and didn't want to, you can simply click on the undo button in the plugin window. Mac users can simply press the Z button to perform the undo function. For more shortcuts like this, make sure to check out the accompanying user guide. The graphic window has some elegant ways for controlling Renaissance EQ. We know that we can click and drag on the band marker to change the frequency and gain for a particular filter band. Mac users can option drag the markers to adjust the bandwidth. PC users alt drag. Double-click any band marker to bypass or enable that filter band. Mac users can command click on any band marker to change the filter type. PC does not support this function. Control drag any band marker to constrain that band to one direction. It will default to the first direction you move in. You can also click and drag across several or all band markers and adjust all bands at once. Note, this can also be accomplished in the value windows below, where the cursor arrows can be used for greatest accuracy. Renaissance EQ represents a powerful step in equalizer technology. Conventions as off-the-shelf capacitor values that compromise a typical piece of EQ hardware. Make sure to check out all of the Waves tutorial movies available from Coolbreeze Systems. XClick is part of the restoration group of plugins. It was created to reduce strong, transient, and impulsive noises while preserving pristine audio quality. It should be used before Xcrackle when doing vinyl restoration, as the large transients should be reduced before taking care of the more delicate scratch noises. The most common candidates for XClick are the clicks created by digital errors and physical damage to the groove of an LP. XClick works on a very high resolution, and when set properly, it is very effective with virtually no audible artifacts. There are two main parameters to adjust when using XClick. Threshold sets the level for the targeted clicks. Higher values remove more clicks, and a value of 0 removes no clicks. The suggested start setting for basic vinyl recording restoration is between 30 and 50. Shape denotes the length or visual width of the targeted clicks. Start with 70 as a basic value for working with vinyl recording restoration, as these pops and clicks are usually wider than digital error clicks. For these, set the value lower. Waves suggests that you monitor with headphones to truly hear the effects of the processing. We will come back to these during our example. In the meantime, let's check out the rest of the controls. After the threshold and shape controls, we will look at the output monitor. Here we can switch between the audio setting, which is the audio being processed by XClick, and difference, which allows the monitoring of clicks presently removed by the XClick settings. I like to use the difference setting to make sure that I haven't removed any desired audio peaks in the process. The XClick scope displays a visual representation of the click removal for the last 10 seconds of processed audio. Detected clicks are shown in red with varying intensity due to the amount of the damage present. The audio that is unaffected is shown in gray. Remember that higher threshold values will cause more red clicks to be present in the scope display. Next is the attenuation meter. It displays the amount of click removal and also equals the level when the monitor button has difference selected. The output meters show the output level for the selected output monitor mode, and like all other Waves plug-in output meters, are peak meters with infinite hold and peak hold value fields below them. You can click anywhere on the meter display to reset the peak hold value. One note of importance regarding XClick. To correctly process clicks, XClick must look ahead of playback to react and detect clicks. It is only possible by delaying the signal 2,624 samples, or roughly 60 milliseconds. This can be problematic when processing a track that must play in sync with others. Final restoration and forensic work on final masters aren't usually affected by this, as they are normally processed in mono or stereo. A single track in a multi-track mix can be processed by XClick, but the selected track must be nudged back, or the other unaffected tracks must be delayed the same 2,624 samples to remain in sync. There are two modes of click removal, automatic and manual. Automatic click removal is the fastest and easiest method of removing clicks from a piece of audio. Waves suggests that you may even want to use X-Crackle inserted after X-Click for a one-step process of click and pop removal. Be careful with the automatic process, as it can remove some of the desired transient sounds of audio with much drums or percussion. If you can't achieve a setting that is an acceptable balance of click removal and audio fidelity for the whole song, then manual click removal is a better solution. You can manually remove clicks in the following fashion. First, insert X-Click on the track in question. Next, set the threshold near 0 and the shape near 70. This is aggressive click detection. Next, select Difference in the Monitor section. Assign the track to the input of an extra adjacent track, and from beginning to end, record the difference mode audio to use as a click log or timeline. Now, using the click log track as a guide, process the original track's audio with X-Click a click or section at a time. This should take care of your problematic audio, and remember, you can always undo the processing and alter your settings before further processing. Let's apply X-Click to an audio example of a damaged vinyl LP. We will be using the automatic method, but make sure that if you don't achieve desirable results, to try the manual method of click removal explained previously. X-Click from Waves Restoration Package is a welcome addition to any DAW, whether you are fixing digital clicks in a final mix, cleaning up your favorite old records, or performing forensic audio cleanup for use as evidence in court. Make sure to check out the X-Noise movie tutorial for related info. Also, for a closer review of this plugin, check out our edits and processing with headphones to possibly catch things you might have missed in your monitor speakers. X-Noise is part of the Waves Restoration Bundle, and it mainly targets background noise such as tape hiss and unwanted room noises. It is a single-ended real-time noise reduction tool that doesn't require the encode-decode process such as other popular noise reduction tools. Instead, it uses frequency domain analysis to detect and reduce unwanted noise from the source audio with a minimum of induced artifacts. Being a real-time process, you can hear the results immediately. Make sure to treat transient noise such as pops from an old LP with X-Click and possibly X-Crackle before using X-Noise. X-Noise works by learning the character of the noise and creating a noise profile, which helps distinguish the noise from the audio signal. It uses the latest in audio research and processing power enabled by a new generation of powerful desktop computer systems to remove unwanted noise and preserve sonic clarity. Let's check out the controls using a noisy guitar track as our example. It was recorded in a live club with a large refrigeration unit directly behind the stage. It was emitting so much EMF that it made this single-coil Stratocaster buzz like a swarm of bees. We need to select a portion of the signal, at least 100 milliseconds, where the noise is by itself. This is usually at the beginning, ending, or sometimes a break within the song. We were fortunate to be running constantly and were able to capture a fair amount of noise without the music. While playing from the beginning, hit the Learn button to begin the learn process, and then again to stop the process. The white line that is generated on the graph dictates the noise profile. Make sure not to have any noise reduction active while using the learn process. You can then adjust the threshold and reduction settings to separate the noise profile from the original audio. The threshold represents the level of the noise profile, and the signal below this profile is removed, while the signal above is not affected. Reduction determines the amount of noise reduction applied to the signal below the threshold. Try setting the threshold at 20 decibels and the reduction to 75% to begin experimenting. It is crucial that you use your ears carefully to adjust this plugin. Make sure to use the audio difference output button to actually solo or isolate the noise signal that is being removed from the audio. The trick here is to have it so none of the musical or pertinent audio is affected by the noise reduction. In difference mode, you can listen for this and tweak the settings to lessen the effect of the source audio. If time aliasing artifacts such as singing or robot-like sounds occur, try decreasing the reduction setting and increase the threshold setting to about 30 decibels above the background noise. These artifacts can also be decreased by using the attack, release, resolution, and high shelf controls. The attack control adjusts the time from when the noise is first detected to the point of full noise reduction. Noise reduction is smoothly increased to avoid pops and clicks from occurring due to the DSP processing. The default time of 30 milliseconds works for most applications, yet plosive sounds may require a shorter setting, and audio with a slow dynamic envelope may require a longer setting. Release controls the rate at which noise reduction is smoothly decreased from its full effect. Longer times preserve more ambience, and shorter times are useful in removing noise in speech for forensic or other restoration tasks. The high shelf is a noise profile modifier. It is not another EQ in the signal chain. Boosting high frequencies of the profile will require more reduction of that particular spectrum. It is only used to modify how X noise works on the high frequency. The frequency control ranges from 400 Hz to 20 kHz, with a default of 4006 Hz. The gain control affects the attenuation applied to the high-frequency content. An increase of gain yields a higher threshold for the frequencies above the shelf cutoff frequency. Therefore, more noise reduction occurs in that spectrum. Decreasing the gain lowers the threshold and therefore lessens the gain reduction in the high frequencies. The resolution controls how fine the analysis is, which affects the amount of CPU horsepower used by X noise. The high setting uses the most CPU resources and results with the best audio signal. It is also the finest resolution in the frequency domain, but not in the time domain. If you hear smearing artifacts, make sure to lower the resolution. The noise reduction meter shows the level of noise removed. It also shows the sound level monitored with a different setting. The main display window shows 3 frequency graph lines. The red line is the original audio signal before X noise. The white line is the noise profile. And the green line is the output signal post X noise. Once again, make sure to use your ears. Headphone listening is recommended for fine-tuning in certain applications. Let's take a moment to tame this noisy guitar track. As you can see, X-Noise can restore a track that might have been otherwise deemed unusable and is a very valuable tool in your audio production toolkit. For additional information, check out the Plugins movie library at coolschoolonline.com. Renaissance Reverb is a high-quality reverb plugin with a powerful graphic interface. Waves adapted the early reflection system from TrueVerb, improved upon it, created a new reverb tail, and then created a logical graphic user interface for intuitive control with positive visual feedback. Renaissance Reverb is loosely based upon classic sounds of vintage hardware reverbs. It goes a bit further due to the previously described graphic interface. There are two ways to use reverb. The first is an Ascend configuration inserted on a stereo aux input, in which you should set the wet-dry mix to 100% wet. The second is Through configuration inserted on a selected track or master fader. The usual wave system controls are at the top of the window. Make sure to read the chapter for the wave system, as it is used in every one of their plugins. Here we will load a waves preset for demonstration of the plugin. Next are three graphic editing windows: the reverb damping graph with control markers, the time response graph with reverb type pull-down, and the Reverb EQ, also equipped with click and drag markers. Below these are 9 slide controls divided into 2 sections, Reverb Properties and Reverb Levels. Let's take a closer look. At the core of Renaissance Reverb are the reverb type algorithms. These affect both the reverb and early reflection behavior. Make sure to experiment with all types of reverbs to gain better understanding of its processing power and sonic realism. The decorrelation control ranges from variation 0 to variation 6. This affects the amount of correlation between the left and right channels within the early reflections. Simply click on the button to cycle through the variations to get a feel of the subtle change this imparts on the reverb coloration. Next, let's check out the Reverb Properties section. The pre-delay ranges from negative 160 milliseconds to 160 milliseconds. The positive values yield typical pre-delay effect, but Waves added negative values which actually delay the direct or dry signal. This only works when the wet-dry control is set to less than 100%, thus enabling the ability to even hear the dry signal at all, let alone delayed. Notice that the button appears red, warning you that you are delaying the dry signal and may not be the effect you are looking for. The time of decay control ranges from 1/10 of a second to 20 seconds in length. This sets the decay time for the reverb tail. The size control ranges from 1 to 100. This control can affect early reflection spacing, reverb tail dimension, and more controls depending on which reverb type is selected. Diffusion ranges from 0 to 100. This controls the balance between the direct and early reflections feeding the reverb tail. Minimum diffusion setting is 0, and only the direct signal is feeding the reverb tail. Maximum diffusion setting is 100, and only the early reflections are used to feed the reverb tail. Decay ranges from 0 to linear. It causes the reverb tail to have nonlinear properties. All types and presets of reverbs can have a nonlinear or gated sound by lowering the decay control. Waves suggests a time setting of 1 to 3 seconds for proper gating effect. Next are the reverb level controls. The early reflections level control is first and it ranges from 0 to off. The reverb level control is next and it also ranges from 0 to off. The wet-dry mix control ranges from 0 to 100. Lastly is the gain control, which controls input gain for the plugin. Let's look at the damping controls next. The low frequency control ranges from 16 Hz to 1600 Hz and controls the knee or slope of where the low frequency damping begins. The low frequency ratio ranges from 1 to 2 and controls the progressive frequency response of the reverb's low range. The high frequency ratio ranges from 1 to 2 and controls the progressive frequency response of the reverb's high range. You can adjust these parameters with the handy click and drag markers, which control both frequency and ratio with the drag of the mouse. Next are the reverb EQ controls. Low frequency range ranges from 16 to 1600 Hz and controls the knee of the reverb low equalization. This precedes the early reflections and reverb sections. The low gain ranges from -24 to +12 dB and is the gain control for the shelving EQ. It becomes a cut filter when equal to -24. High frequency ranges from 100 to 2100 Hz and controls the knee of the reverb high equalization. This also precedes the early reflections and reverb sections. High gain ranges from -24 to 12 dB and is the gain control of the shelving EQ. It also becomes a cut filter when equal to -24. You can also adjust these parameters in the graph by using the marker controls. They also control two parameters at the same time. Let's take a look at the time response graph. The early reflection spacing is shown by the small orange lines and the reverb tail is shown by the solid orange triangle. These are controlled in a variety of ways, but are not draggable. Most often they are linked to the size control, but other parameters will affect this graph as well. Now let's take a look at the reverb types. Hall 1, Hall 2, Room, Chamber, Church, Plate 1, Plate 2, Reverse, Gated, Nonlinear, Echoverb, and Resoverb. Make sure to check out the Renaissance Reverb user guide for detailed descriptions of each type. We are going to apply Renaissance Reverb to a drum kit to add some room dimension to the sound. In this case, we are moving the drums further back in the mix, but still maintaining their wide stereo image. You can also pan the reverb return to place the reverberated signal in a specific location in the sound field. Renaissance Reverb is useful when mixing or even adding a little depth to a mastering project. Make sure to experiment with all presets and controls to better understand its capabilities, and be sure to save your custom creations for later use. TrueVerb by Waves combines very powerful control of reverb algorithms and exceptional sounding reverb effects. TrueVerb's features and capabilities, much like many of the other plugins demonstrated here, are quite broad. In this movie tutorial, we will not cover every parameter in great detail, but provide an overview of key concepts and parameters to help you get up and running quickly. Make sure to peruse the Waves user guide for further information and other helpful examples. Now let's check it out. There are two modes that can be used with TrueVerb, send and through. Send mode is where TrueVerb is applied to a mono or stereo auxiliary input and fed by a virtual bus so that other channels or tracks can be routed to it. To use TrueVerb in this fashion, make sure to disable the direct signal with the appropriate button shown here. Through mode is used on a master fader, virtual bus master fader, channel, or track. The direct button should be active, and then the balance of the direct, early reflections, and reverb tail can be adjusted separately. Let's go over the controls. The top window is the time response graph, and it displays room size, distance to source, early reflections, pre-delay, reverb tail, and their relative levels. Let's apply TrueVerb to the master fader in through mode of a jazz session while explaining the many controls. First is the dimension control. It changes the character of the early reflections to create a variable 2 to 4 dimensional space. 2.0 equals 2-dimensional space, 3.0 equals 3-dimensional space, and 4 represents a 4-dimensional space. Listen while we adjust it. Room size is shown in cubic meters, and it can be adjusted from 50 cubic meters to 20,000 cubic meters. You can also click and drag the blue arrows in the graphic display to change the room size. Distance is also represented in meters, and it controls the apparent distance from the listener to the input source. You can also adjust this by dragging the yellow arrows left or right. The Link toggle button links the reverb, room, and pre-delay together. When activated, the reverb and pre-delay match the level of the last reflection in the room. The balance control is used to mix the balance between the reverb and direct plus early reflection levels. Positive values increase the reverb and decrease the direct plus the early reflections. Negative values do the opposite. It can be controlled by dragging up or down in the field or clicking on the blue crosshatch in the graphic display. Decay time is measured in seconds and determines the time it takes for the early reflections and reverb tails to fade out. Pre-delay control is measured in milliseconds, and it changes the perceived delay time before the reverb begins. Notice it is grayed out when the link button is engaged. The density display controls the density of the initial buildup of the reflections in the reverb. Percussion sounds usually sound better with higher density settings. The next graphic display with controls is the frequency response graph. The early reflection low cut with the in-out switch acts as a low frequency shelving filter for the early reflections only. When active, it is shown by a yellow line in the low frequency portion of the graph. The rev shelf is measured in decibels, and it is a high-frequency filter for only the input to the reverb. It is shown as a blue line in the graphic display. The ER absorb is intended to simulate the absorption properties of a real room's surfaces. It only affects the early reflections. A low setting simulates a room that is dull, such as one full of carpet. It is shown as a yellow line in the graphic display. The frequency sets the corner frequency for the shelf and ER absorb controls. The next set of controls are for the tone shaping of the reverb signal only. There are low and high frequency shelving filters that control the high or low damping for the reverb signal. There are also controls that set the corner frequency for these two filters. Notice that the blue crosshairs in the graphic window can control the corner frequency and damping factor at the same time. The last section to cover is the input-output section. The input gain allows you to trim the input signal to avoid clipping. Below this are the in-out toggle switch and level controls for the direct, early reflection, and reverb signals. To the right are the stereo output VU meters with the numeric infinite peak hold beneath the meters. Above the VU meters is a clip indicator that turns red and shows the word clip if your signal reaches above 0 dB. To reset the peak values, click directly on the meters, and to reset the click box, simply click on the box. Let's pick from one of the factory presets as a starting point and create a usable reverb for this mix. REVERB is also great for remastering a live board mix recording, as you can add depth and stereo dimension without phase problems. I've also used it for creating endings on remixes and all-around reverb processing. As mentioned in the intro, this plugin has much depth, and we've only scratched the surface of its real capabilities. Make sure to check out the Waves user guide for other pertinent information and some great user examples. The Doppler effect is a well-documented audio theory first explained in 1842 by Christian Doppler. This effect is a change in the frequency of waveform where the sound source is moving in relation to the observer, as in the change of pitch heard in a train whistle as it approaches then passes. The pitch is higher as it approaches, and it lowers as it goes by. This is due to the fact that the speed of the sound is relatively constant. In this movie tutorial, we will cover the Waves Doppler processing plugin, which is designed to simulate the Doppler effect of audio passing by. Waves processing parameters are based upon reality, or under the normal laws of physics, but the controls allow us to travel way beyond the normal laws of physics to create exaggerated flybys, such as those in Hollywood-produced movies. Let's check out the controls. The space display shows a graphic window with the listener's position denoted by a red dot. The orange line is the track on which we will see the moving cursor of Doppler. The start and end points are shown along with the center handle. It shows the audio path as if it were moving. The direction button is in the upper left portion of the window and controls the direction that the Doppler audio travels along the track. The elapsed time counter resets itself at the beginning of each Doppler cycle. The start and end points are draggable, controlling where the Doppler travel begins and ends. In the middle of these points is the center handle. It allows you to modify the curve of the track and adjust the path of Doppler. Track time is the adjustment for total track time. It usually will be the same length as the selected audio, but it doesn't have to be this way. This is handy when you want Doppler to begin in the middle of an audio region. Set the track time to a smaller number and use the manual trigger to choose the start time for Doppler to begin. Center time generally defaults to half the track length. Adjusting the center time causes the sound to accelerate before or after the center point. Setting the center time to greater than half the track length causes the sound to approach more slowly until reaching the center point where it accelerates as the object moves away. There are two mode buttons: continuous cycling and one-shot mode. Continuous simply repeats the track time with the Doppler effect over and over. One-shot starts when the process is triggered, whether by energy trigger or manual. Trigger mode has energy or manual settings. The energy trigger begins Doppler when it senses audio signal. The manual trigger starts Doppler each time the button is clicked, even if the track cycle has not completed its full path. Next is the Master Reality Control section. Gain, when set to 0%, there is no gain change, and therefore the sounds at a distance will have the same level as they are when they are close. As you approach 100%, you will hear a more realistic variance in the volume of close and far sounds. The gain can be adjusted up to 200% for extreme and exaggerated gain drops. The pan control. The stereo effect of Doppler can be adjusted with the pan control. 0% can be used when your effects will be used by another engineer at soundstage, and he requires that you send mono effects in order for him to pan to his liking. A setting of 100% is more realistic, and you can adjust it up to 200% for more exaggerated pan effect. The pitch control. Setting the pitch to 0% yields no Doppler effect at all. A setting of 100% simulates reality, and adjusting up to 200% allows for exaggerated Doppler effects a la Hollywood style. Air damp. As sound travels through the air towards the listener, the high frequencies roll off more with increased distance from the source. When set to 0%, there is no damping effect, and therefore no high frequency reduction at all. When set to 100%, the damping effect is more realistic to the ear. The high frequency reduction begins around 10 kHz. A setting greater than 100% will increase the high frequency damping even further. The reverb control. This controls the amount of reverb to the output signal. It is not a wet-dry control, it merely controls the gain to mix reverb into the output. Reverb time adjusts the overall reverb time in seconds. Reverb brightness controls the high-frequency character of the reverb tail. It ranges from 0 to 1, 1 being the brightest setting. The best way to begin may be to load a factory preset and tweak it to fit your application. The most common use would be flybys. Let's take a preset and adjust it to affect our sound effect to our liking. Careful balance of the aforementioned controls should yield the proper motion and pitch shifting that you require. Make sure to check out extreme presets such as Jerky Tape Machine or Physics Anomaly 1 or 2. Experimenting with these can produce some interesting effects. Doppler is definitely a must-have for the professional sound designer's toolkit. Look for additional tutorials on related post-application in future CSI training products. Enigma by Waves is aptly named as it can create notches in a signal similar to the way phasers and flangers do. It also contains a reverb-type processor, feedback loop, low-frequency oscillator, filters in various places, and some controls that vary depending upon the setup and can be very hard to describe. They are interactive and you should experiment freely, making sure to save the interesting discoveries as it may be hard to recreate, much like the original analog synthesizers were. Before going too deep, we need to give a warning in regard to the depth control, because under certain circumstances, making sudden changes in the value can cause very loud signals. So be careful when typing in values or dragging the depth slider too quickly. Treat it like your control room volume and adjust it with as much care. There are 4 major processing and control blocks to Enigma, and they are separated into the upper and lower window partitions. Let's play a track for demonstration. The top section is called the notch section, where you will see the moving notch line, which is modulated by the little control section in the top right corner of the window. On the left edge of the window are the notches, where you can set the number of notches used. Below this is the stereo width control. Dragging left decreases and dragging right increases the stereo width. Make sure to always experiment with the setting, as results can be dramatic. Sometimes a full value of 100% will not have the widest stereo image for reasons too complicated for Waves to explain, but you can adjust this to see for yourself. Try setting the mix value to 100 for full wet output. The depth control is next, and it controls the depth value of the notches. Notice the graphic representation while adjusting. The phase button reverses the polarity of the notches, or their up-down orientation. The plus half button adds a half pair of notches to the upper end. Check out the graph as we toggle this button. This merely adds another zig at the end of the zigzags, and thus will change the character of the effect. The modulation section. The on-off buttons, shown as pause and play buttons, can be used to stop that crazy modulation, freeze the notches for a certain tonal character, and to automate the modulator. Next is the waveform selector. Here you can choose from sawtooth up, sawtooth down, triangle, sine, and square waves. Next are the rate and beat per minute controls, allowing the adjustment of the modulation in seconds or beats. The minimum maximum frequency field allows you to set the boundaries for the frequency range to be swept. Next is the feedback section. First are the feedback on-off buttons and the phase reverse switch. The decay time control is more easily thought of as a feedback control than for decay time. Longer delay values will make this clearly evident. The delay slider allows for 184 milliseconds of delay to be used. The density controls the stereo spread of the individual delays. When the density value is greater than 0, the delay times for left and right channels will be different, and when equal to 0, they will be the same, and therefore mono. Let's check out the global section now. The gain control allows you to trim the overall affected level to avoid clipping. The mix controls the wet-dry balance of the source material and Enigma. The pre-delay delays Enigma before mixing it with the dry signal. The wet button offers 3 modes: stereo, which is the standard stereo output of the wet signal; mono is the summing of the left and right wet signals; and mono plus phase reverse takes the left channel and reverses the phase and then sums it with the right channel, which usually creates more dramatic notching and effects. Let's load a factory preset as a starting point and experiment with the controls. I have found Enigma to be very useful for those times when you don't want to use the same old effect on the same old guitar, vocal, etc. The psychedelic filtering effect has come in handy with dance remixes that need a little ear candy. Try it on loops, keyboards, and other rhythmic instruments to spice things up some. Depending upon your platform, Enigma can be automated to capture some of the experimentation that can yield new combinations and effects. Make sure to check out the Enigma user guide for more related info. The Waves Morphoder is a powerful digital audio processing plugin that resembles a vocoder, but it has some extra features included as well. The vocoder allows us to combine 2 audio sources using one as a modulator and the other as a carrier. In our example, we will be using a vocal track as the modulator and the internal 8-voice polyphonic synthesizer as the carrier. This will allow the vocal to be affected in a variety of creative ways. Let's check out the controls. Top left in the window are the pull-downs for the modulator and carrier sources. The modulator select choices are left, right, left plus right, and sidechain where available. The carrier select choices are track, left, right, sidechain, and internal. We will set this to internal. Next is the noise generator. Waves uses this to breathe the carrier with an airy sound. This can add to the effect and, when mixed together with the carrier signal, it passes through the filter and is always available. All you need to do is mix it in with the output fader in the master section. The noise is generally a wideband white noise. The filter control gives you choice of high-pass filter, low-pass filter, and a setting for bypassing the filter section. The frequency control specifies the cutoff frequency for the filter. It is the center frequency for bandpass and the frequency at 3 decibels roll-off at the slope of high-pass and low-pass filter settings. Synth Select allows us to pick from one of the 10 available factory preset synths. These are meant to be tweaked and filtered out. By using the carrier fader, the synths can be auditioned by themselves. It's more effective when morphed with the modulator. The tune control allows us to adjust the tuning from 220 to 880 Hz. The default is 440 Hz, with single Hz resolution. The spread control correlates with the number of voices used in the internal synth. A spread setting of 0 plays the stereo carrier notes on top of each other without rotation or pan. As the spread control is increased, the different synth voices are spread out across the stereo field. The EQ contour controls. Morphoder gives us 5 bands of EQ, a low shelf, 3 bell curves, and a high shelf to color the sound. Each band has waves paragraphic control and is shown visually in the display above. You can grab the handles in the graph to adjust the filter or use the value fields to change the EQ curve. For each band, there is a gain control, boost or cut, frequency control, bandwidth control, and a handy on-off audition button. Morphoder also gives us 4 sound character controls to shape our sound. The pressure control combines the modulator source input gain and compression with auto makeup gain into a single control. Make sure to listen closely when auditioning this effect. The formant ratio control is used to offset the Morphoder filter up or down the frequency range. When using a speech modulator, a value of 1 equals a natural setting, and increasing this will increase the modulator formant. This can make a male voice female and vice versa. The smoothing control affects the signal in such a way that low settings sound choppy, but retain high intelligibility, and high values sound more ambient, tending to blur the intelligibility factor. The release control is similar to smoothing in that it sets the time that it will take the filter to fade out in the absence of a modulator signal. Normal settings leave gaps in between events, and longer release settings simply hold the last constructed filter. The carrier fader is used mainly to audition the internal synth and sets the mix level to the plugin's output. The modulator adjusts the mix of the modulator to the plugin's output. The noise fader allows adjustment of the noise generator to the plugin's output. And lastly, the morph fader controls the level of the modulated carrier. The keyboard is a 4-octave controller for the internal synth. The sustain button is helpful when auditioning the modulator as it holds the notes selected. Let's apply some of these controls to a vocal track and try to make it speak through the internal synth. As you can see and hear, Morphoder is a very powerful and unique vocoding style effect and can be useful to many musical genres. For more detailed information, make sure to check out the Waves user guides included with your plugin. In this movie tutorial, we will cover PAS, Psychoacoustic Analyzer. This plugin is a real-time analyzer based on our hearing, which shows 52 or 68 bands with RMS, peak, weighting, variable integration time, and more. Depending upon the host application, high-end configurations will show 4 instances of the plugin. The PAS Analyzer is the full plugin that shows all 3 measurement functions. It has the greatest draw on CPU graphics power. PAS Position shows only the stereo position display and its related controls. PAS Frequency displays only the real-time frequency analysis and its related controls. And PAS Meters shows only the meters for left, right, and sum. The sum meter can display peak or RMS modes. We are going to use the full plugin to demonstrate all aspects of PAS. Let's check out the controls. We will have to play some audio through PAS in order to view the graphic representation and control available. The frequency window is where we see the real-time analyzer and the controls for viewing it. Much effort has gone into recreating what we hear as something we see in this plugin. The LF or low frequency resolution control should usually be set to 40 Hz, as it is this setting that most closely emulates what we hear. At this setting, there are 52 bands, which correlates with the constant Q critical frequency bands of the human ear. You can set the LF resolution lower to 20 or 10 Hz, which provides up to 68 bands for highly detailed and technical uses. The Detect button gives us 2 choices, peak and RMS, and they are modified by the response control. Peak detection mode displays peaks in each frequency band, and the response time simply controls the release of the meter. RMS mode displays the energy as being averaged over time, and the response time controls the time that it takes to reach the average peak. The Show button allows us to use PAS as a mono or stereo metering plugin. If using a stereo source, the mono selection is a sum of left plus right. Notice also that the left and right info can be represented independently. The Weight button shows 3 weighting curves. The explanation of this is truly beyond the scope of this tutorial, but here is a nice way to look at it. We are less sensitive to low frequency signals at lower volumes, so at low mixing volumes it's better to use A-weighted. Medium volumes, choose B-weighted. And at high volumes, for critical testing, use C-weighted for proper display behavior. The Freeze button freezes the display until deselected. This is handy for viewing a troublesome frequency that occurs in a short section or burst. The Peak and Hold Show Hide button allows us to see an infinitely updating peak hold display shown as an orange line in the RTA and the stereo field. Next to this button is the Clear button for the peak hold function. You can click on the frequency display to drop a crosshair cursor that is helpful in finding problematic frequencies and their amplitude. Click and drag the crosshair to the corner to hide it. You can Option or Alt-click on the graphic RTA display to zoom in, and then you can click on the Zoom Reset to zoom back out. Clicking and dragging on the zoom controls is another way of changing the display. The Stereo Position display. This shows us the energy of a stereo signal both in amplitude and width of the stereo image. It shows mono audio signal going straight up, and signals panned hard left or right are shown at 45-degree angles with occasional peaks even wider. Out-of-phase signals are shown as between 45 and 90 degrees and in red anti-phase to warn you that you might not like the sound of this effect. The meters display show a left and right peak meter with peak indicators above and value fields below. Between these is a summed loudness meter that is a better gauge of loudness for mastering a compilation of songs. Having been a mastering engineer for a few years, I have come to rely upon PAS for visual representation of my processing and in order to create a more cohesive master. Let's play some audio and then vary how we analyze this audio example.
I believe this time. This will cause some stress. Living life in the city of sex. A fine line between two would say, and I should say, everywhere I find the wild, you won't give me what I wonder why you don't. Made a habit of mine, so I'm here asking why, when you're right, I believe this time you're right, when you're right, I believe this time. You told me twice, I was so sure you were wrong, but I should have taken your advice. We're asking why, when you're right, I believe this time you're right.
PAZ is an indispensable tool for myself and many other engineers out there that need some visual representation of their audio processing in order to create a better product. Make sure you check out the user guide for even more information regarding PAZ. The PS22 Stereo Maker is an important tool in creating stereo sound from a mono source, as well as providing the capability of creating a richer stereo image from an existing stereo recording. The concept of synthesizing a stereo sound from a mono source is not a new one, but PS22's ability to do it convincingly without undesirable artifacts and altering the original source audio's tonality makes it a valuable tool. PS22 also avoids the phasiness that we are accustomed to with comb filtering or copying the mono track, sliding at 10 milliseconds, and panning the two signals hard left and right. It can also be a subtle stereo enhancement or create extremely wide stereo effects from mono or stereo sources. PS22 contains three components. PS Spread. This creates a smooth spreading of sounds across the stereo image with low phasiness, and also the additional bass spread enhancement for even more spaciousness. PS22 Spread is the full DSP instance of the plugin, and PS22 Spread 10 is the DSP saving instance with only 10 sweeps. The shape of the sweeps is a sine wave. PS Split was designed to take a mono source signal and synthesize a stereo image from it. It completely splits the sound across the stereo image. If you look at the sweep graphic, the split looks more like a square wave moving back and forth, unlike Spread, which looks more like a sine wave. Best results are achieved when PS22 Spread or Split are followed by one of the DLA family plug-in tools. These are generally stereo in-out processors that can increase the stereo effect and maintain the overall stereo frequency response. They can be used by themselves or in tandem with the PS Spread or PS Split Stereo Maker plugins. This tutorial is specifically about PS22, and you should definitely check out the user guide for detailed information of the DLA family of plugins and their various applications. It's not completely necessary to use DLA plugs after PS22. You can substitute a stereo reverb plugin like TrueVerb or Renaissance Reverb instead. PSX Split is nearly the combination described above, as the DLA XL and PS Split work together to create an even more dramatic stereo effect. Since PS22's spread controls are the basic set that are common to all three PS components, we will use it to demonstrate one of its many uses. Let's check out the controls. We will divide the controls into input and spread sections. The input controls. First is the gain fader, adjustable from digital 0 down to -24 dB. It is used to avoid digital clipping while using PS22. Next is the width control. This is only shown when working with a stereo signal. The width parameter ranges from 0 mono to 1.0. It allows us to fold the input signal's stereo image inward before processing to avoid making the signal too wide. The rotation control allows the adjustment for centering of the input stereo signal without affecting the left-right level balance. Its range is in degrees from -45 to +45. This is useful for centering an off-center mix or moving mono material to the left or right. Next are the channel polarity and swap buttons. The purpose of these is to correct deficiencies with the input signal. The plus-minus buttons both show plus for normal polarity. If, however, you have a mix that is out of phase, you can reverse the polarity of the left or right signal by clicking on the plus and changing one of them to a minus. The channel swap arrow button reverses the left and right channels in case you had your cables backwards to your mixdown machine. The spread controls are divided into two groups, the spread envelope controls and the spread statistics controls. The spread envelope controls control the degree of spread as a function of frequency content. The spread ranges from 0, no spread, to 1.2, ultra-wide spread. A spread of 1 fills the stereo field between the two speakers. If you use spread while monitoring the MS level indicators and width control, you can adjust the signal as to not exaggerate it too much. Frequency is measured in hertz, and it controls the frequency where the bass spread begins. Waves suggest starting with a value of 630 Hz, but notice that the range is from 32 Hz to 16 kHz. LF spread gives us additional control of the bass frequency spread. A setting of 1 yields the same degree of spread as the high frequencies. A setting of 2 yields a wider bass stereo image. A setting of 0 yields mono or centered bass frequencies. The spread statistics controls adjust the way the input signal is panned back and forth based upon frequency content. The panning is shown in the graphic portion of the window. The sweeps field displays the number of sweeps between left and right across the entire audio frequency spectrum. The value ranges from 2 to 22, 10 in the PS Spread 10 instance of this plugin. A setting of 2 means the signal sweeps from left to right and back as it goes from low to high frequencies. F-center or frequency center is measured in hertz, and it adjusts the center frequency for the F-density parameter. F-density chooses whether to increase or decrease the density of sweeps around the F-center frequency. A setting of 0 produces uniformly distributed sweeps across the frequency range. Positive settings cause the sweeps to be more dense near the center frequency and less dense further away from the center. Negative values cause the sweeps to be spaced wider apart near the F-center frequency and more dense at the bass and treble ends of the spectrum. The tweak control ranges from -1 to +1, and this pans the particular frequencies within the stereo image. This is quite useful in achieving a balanced spread between left and right speakers. The tweak control is only effective when using 3 or more sweeps. Let's take a look at the graphic window and its controls. Here we see a graphic representation of the overall spread envelope shown in blue. It is superimposed behind the vertical grid lines which show left, center, and right stereo positions. It also has 2 cursors. The solid square density cursor can control the F-center by dragging vertically, and F-density by dragging horizontally. If you hold the Option key for Mac or Alt for Windows, dragging vertically will change the tweak parameter instead of the F-center parameter. Lastly, let's look at the meters on the right. Like all Waves products, they are infinite peak hold meters that are reset by clicking anywhere on the meter itself. If a signal clips, the clip box above the meters will indicate clip until the meters are reset. Below the meters are the digital values showing the highest peak encountered. The left-right mode is for standard left-right metering. MS only affects the meter display and has no effect on the output. It is handy, however, at determining if you have gone over the top with your stereo synthesis. M represents the amount of mono signal present, and S represents the amount of side signal, or the signal representing the differences between the left and right channels. If the S meter is showing greater level than the M meter, you have probably used too much stereo processing. The whitest sounding results are usually displayed by the M and S signals being roughly equal. Less S than M will produce a narrower effect. Let's use the controls on a track and make sure to look at the graphic window when we adjust the various parameters of PS22. PS22 is a useful group of plugins that are at home in music production as well as post-production for video and film. Make sure to experiment with it and save your settings for later use. Remember, if you're not quite sure of some of the general processing terms used in these movie tutorials, take the time to check out the CSI glossary in the locator. The S1 stereo imager can be thought of as a stereo processing toolkit for use in mastering and multi-track recording sessions. It can be used to correct faults in a stereo recording or to enhance the stereo field of a mix. Waves provides an intuitive graphic interface for S1, making it easy to drive for the first time without the manual in hand. In addition to our tutorial, you should definitely read the manual or peruse the user guide included with this plugin to gain further understanding of its processing potential. There may be multiple instances of S1 in your plugin selection pull-down. We are using S1 48 Shuffler, which has all the bells and whistles except IDR. All S1 instances are stereo-only plugins. Let's check out the interface. The most notable feature in the window is the stereo vector display. It shows nothing in regards to the input signal, but it does show the output positions of the original left, center, and right sounds. It also shows an accurate picture of their changed levels in dB. It does not show the effect of shuffling, but only gain, width, asymmetry, and rotation. Shuffling happens later in signal flow. Gain, shown in decibels, adjusts the overall gain level of the plugin. Width allows you to considerably adjust the width of the stereo image. Values greater than 1 widen the stereo image, as values less than 1 create a narrower soundstage. Asymmetry is unique as it doesn't affect central mono signals that are in phase, but affects the left and right audio signals. Since it doesn't change the center image, you are able to center a stereo mix without moving the mix off center. The rotation control. This allows us to adjust the centering of the entire stereo image without any effect on relative sound levels in different parts of the stereo image. This can also be used as a pan control for true stereo sound sources. Note, you can click and drag between the asymmetry and rotation faders to control them in a linked fashion. This gives the plugin a separate stereo balance control.
Crazy psychic lady called to me. I know your birthday ain't yours.
Shuffling increases the stereo width at bass frequencies to help compensate for the fact that our ears perceive stereo effects to be narrower in the bass frequencies than in the treble frequencies. This effect does not introduce unwanted phase artifacts between the two channels. Waves suggest settings between 1.6 and 2.5. The frequency control ranges from 350 to 1400 Hz and controls the frequency below which the shuffling effect is increased. The left-right middle-side input button toggles between accepting standard left-right inputs or middle-side inputs from a stereo microphone technique of the same name. This process requires decoding due to the nature of its technique. Middle side recording uses a stereo microphone capable of MS encoding or using a cardioid mic facing forward and a bidirectional facing perpendicular left and right. The mono output of the bidirectional mic is split into two channels and the phase of one channel is flipped 180 degrees. This can be done with a mixer and 3 channels, a phase reverse switch, or a special mult cable that achieves the same purpose. Make sure to search MS in the locator glossary for a complete definition. S1 also can do this, but it's much easier. Below this button is the left-right swap and phase reverse buttons for comparisons and fixing material with combat audio heroics. The bass trim adjusts the level of the bass when the plugin is active. Higher shuffler settings may require a 1 to 2 dB bass trim boost to compensate for bass level shift during the processing. The output meters are equipped with infinite peak hold indicators that are easily reset by clicking on the meter display. The meters can display left-right output or middle-side output. You can control gain, rotation, width, and asymmetry directly from the graph. Click and drag up or down to change the gain. Click and drag left or right to change the rotation. Command or Control click and drag up or down to change the width. And Command or Control click and drag left or right to change the asymmetry. Let's illustrate the controls on a mix. If you are not listening in stereo, please do so to hear the full effect of this example.
Spoke to me the other day, then a devil did the same. The angel told me to kneel down and pray. The devil said don't play his game. Well, I took my time, then I said I don't really listen. Speeches from the dead. I got my mind to use it. I only reason with the light that shines inside my head. A crazy psychic lady called. No, your birthday ain't your name. She said there's trouble in your future, I can see. And what will happen, you're to blame. Well, I took my time, then I said, I don't really listen.
S1 is a powerful plugin for stereo positioning and enhancement with an MS decoder thrown in the toolkit as well. Make sure to check out the user guide for even more information on S1. Sound Shifter is a sophisticated time compression, expansion, and pitch shifting plugin with a flexible user interface. It is great for squeezing a radio spot into a desired length without pitch changing artifacts. It can also be used to adjust the sustain of recorded instruments or fix a sharp or flat note through pitch shifting and many other creative tasks. Sound Shifter is broken into 3 tools. Parametric Sound Shifter, which is designed to change the speed and pitch of an audio byte with a fixed ratio. Sound Shifter Pitch Only, which is designed for real-time pitch shifting of any audio signal. Graphic Sound Shifter gives us the power of graphically automating the pitch and time ratio breakpoint style. The parametric and graphic sound shifter are what Waves call offline processors, or file-based as opposed to real-time plugins. This has been also called destructive editing versus real-time non-destructive editing. This is due to the fact that the time scaling is impossible as a real-time effect. The pitch-only instance of Sound Shifter is the only real-time version and is used to perform real-time pitch shifting during a mix. It can also be used to create doubles and octaves or harmonies for lead and backing vocal tracks, as well as fix the overall pitch of a track that is consistently sharp or flat in comparison with the accompanying tracks. The Sound Shifter plug-in algorithm is a very high-quality processor that is fairly CPU-intensive. Be careful how many instances that you use at once. In some cases, choosing file-based processing will be more beneficial to free up DSP allocation. In fact, it even flexes its processing might during file-based previewing. When using the parametric and graphic sound shifter, which are both file-based and not real-time plugs, it is best that you select a small looped portion of audio for previewing, and then once the setting is satisfactory, then you can select the full region of audio to be processed with Sound Shifter. Let's check out the controls for parametric and graphic sound shifter components. As previously suggested, we are using a small portion of audio that is set to loop for previewing. The parametric sound shifter has 2 main sections with a centrally located global section. The time ratio allows us to adjust the speed up to twice as fast or down to half as fast. The pitch ratio allows us to adjust the frequency ratio up to twice as high or low, which translates to an octave up or an octave down. One of the flexible features of this plugin is the variety of ways to manipulate the speed and pitch of the selected piece of audio. The time ratio section with source and destination columns allow us to enter in time changes with the following formats: real-time or minutes and seconds, tempo or beats per minute, bars and beats, samples, SMPTE, and feet and frames. This allows Sound Shifter to be used for tasks from raising a note 1 semitone to stretching a soundbite to fit a video using SMPTE, or for film using feet and frames. The adjustment is done with the provided fader for freehand settings. Use the source and destination fields to properly scale the time for your selected piece of audio. The pitch ratio gives us the ability to change the pitch of audio without changing the speed. The controls are as follows. At the right, a fader is available for freehand pitch shifting, and below it, a field for the numerical ratio. You can also change the pitch by clicking on any of the fields and then typing the new values into them. The exception is the interval button, which steps through the musical scale intervals 1 step at a time, up or down an octave. You can also adjust this in hertz with the frequency source and destination fields. You can transpose with the semitones field or type in the particular pitch value in cents, where 100 cents equals a semitone. In the middle are the global parameters. The first is SMPTE time formats. When working with video, you may need to use hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. The frame rate can vary from 24 to 30 frames per second for commercial broadcast. Next is the meter control. When working in bars and beats aligned to the proper tempo map, the last important thing for time measurement is the time signature, and this can vary from 4/4 default to less common time signatures like 7/8 and 5/4. This must be set properly to have parameter adjustments truly based on bars, beats, and tempo. Note: when working with bars and beats, make sure to have the tempo set properly first, as this is the basis for all bar and beat data. The mode setting is next. It has 4 presets that vary the accuracy of the scaled audio. Sync should be selected for material that is time sensitive. It is extremely accurate at lower ratios, but the effect will lose clarity and depth at higher settings. Punch is optimized for percussive events and beat-oriented music. Transient is not quite as transient preserving as punch, but is optimized for plucked instruments like guitar or even piano. Smooth is better for voices and slow attack instruments or chamber ensembles. The last setting is link mode. When using unlinked mode, the time and pitch controls are completely independent. When using pitch link mode, the time and pitch are controlled by the pitch ratio. You cannot edit the time parameters when in pitch link mode. When using time link mode, you cannot edit the pitch parameters. When using strap mode, any adjustments made to pitch or time parameters will affect the other equally. Remember that this is a file-based plugin, and once your previewed processing sounds appropriate, make sure to hit the Process button to begin the creation of a new audio file processed with SoundShifter. Let's take a quick look at the graphic SoundShifter. Most of the controls are the same with the exception of the graphic automation window. First, select a section of audio to process, and then click on the Load Waveform button. Here you can make time and pitch ratio changes over time using the waveform display as a ruler for reference. You can also double-click on the timeline and create breakpoints, which can be used to alter the graphic editor. The X and Y faders allow us to zoom in on the horizontal and vertical axes, and there is a Reset Zoom button directly beneath them. On the right side of the window, there is a View pull-down that allows us to choose which time units format to which we are editing. The choices are Real Time, Bars and Beats, Samples, SMPTE, and Feet and Frames. As with the parametric SoundShifter, we can select the source time, ratio, destination, or output time in these different formats depending on the medium in which we are working. Also explained earlier is the mode selection pull-down of punch, transient, smooth, and sync. We can also use the link mode, also previously explained, in 3 different modes: unlinked, time link, and pitch link. Graphic SoundShifter is quite sophisticated and can be used in a variety of tasks. One example of possible uses is during a remix of a song that is not locked to a tempo map and the drum track tends to speed up and slow down slightly. We could map the changes of a looped drum beat that we are trying to sync to the original performance with the graphic window or using the different source destination formats. Other uses include creating Doppler effects for post-production treatment of flybys or drive-bys. SoundShifter is a very powerful plugin, but we have merely scratched the surface of its creative potential. Make sure to check out the Waves user guide for more detailed information and additional production options. UltraPitch is a useful tool for pitch shifting, creating multiple voice harmonies, and other special effects. There are 3 components that make up UltraPitch. Shift is for normal pitch shifting mono and stereo signals. 3-Voice Harmony Maker adds harmonization of 3 additional voices from the original mono or stereo signal. The 6-Voice Harmony Maker adds harmonization of 6 additional voices from the original mono or stereo signal. When processing a stereo signal, the left channel is the default source for pitch detection and shifting, as the process is essentially monophonic and only one input can be tracked according to pitch. Ultra pitch has a range of 1 octave up and 1 octave down with half-step intervals. It only works on monophonic signals since the pitch detection feature in ultra pitch cannot determine the pitch of polyphonic sounds such as a guitar chord. We are going to look at the 6-voice harmony maker since it contains everything the other two components have in the way of features. Let's check out the controls. Starting on the right for a change is the pitch detector graph, which is a real-time graphic display showing the original signal's current pitch. The blue line shows the pitch tracking. When the blue line turns black, this signifies silent movements in the track. If the pitch shows gray, it means there were no detectable pitches. The fader control above the display is the monitor scrolling speed control. Adjust this according to the speed of your monitor. Doing so will allow you to see the pitch detection and be able to adjust the minimum and max pitch thresholds appropriately. The minimum and maximum pitch thresholds are adjusted via the fields below the graphic display or by the yellow handles from within the display. The minimum pitch is the handle with the arrow pointing downward. Set this just below the lowest note performed for best pitch detection.
If you fail, just try it again. Don't give up on that.
The max pitch is the handle with the arrow pointing upward. Set this just above the highest note performed for best pitch detection. You can, for creative effects, set the max and minimum pitch threshold controls to equal each other. Make sure you try this or check out some of the factory presets that use this combination.
Dynamite, the girl, she's dynamite. When we go out,
Below the graphic display is the Mode Options selector. The following are the mode selections. Default, which is for general purpose processing. Voice Steady, which is for voices without quick pitch changes. Voice Stressed, which is for voices with quick pitch changes. Voice Opera, which is for very clear voices. Music Steady, which is for instruments with distinct tones such as flute, piano, etc. Clear Tones, which is for very clear tones such as vibraphone or synthesizer. Bass, which is for low frequency signals such as bass guitar. Now let's move over to the lower left of the plugin window and check out the individual voice controls, including the original signal shown above the additional voices. First are the on-off buttons for the direct signal and each voice. The gain control adjusts the level of each voice. Click and drag, enter the number with the keypad, or just use the appropriate marker to move up or down to adjust the gain. The pan control positions the voices across the stereo field. You can click or drag the value, enter the value into the field from the numeric keypad, or move the appropriate marker in the graph left or right to control the pan image of each voice. The delay control allows us to create a time delay for each voice between 0 and 100 milliseconds. Drag left or right in the field, or enter the value with the numeric keypad. Above the individual voice controls, we find two more controls, direct level and animation. The direct level control adjusts the input level gain of the original track. It can be trimmed to -24 dB. Simply use the fader to make adjustments. The animation control ranges from 0 to 100 milliseconds. It is used to add realism to the ultra pitch effect by creating what Waves calls random asynchronicity. Click and hold the mouse to adjust this control, or simply enter a value with the numeric keypad. The next section is in the middle, and it's called the Voice Character section. It displays the settings of the voice's pitch and format parameters. It includes a graphic window which allows control of some of the included parameters. When a voice is on, you will see a color-coded marker representing it. If you click and drag up or down on the marker, you will be adjusting the pitch of the selected voice. If you drag from side to side, you will be adjusting the format parameter of the selected voice. Next is the link selection. Set it to free for no constraints on the formants axis while adjusting the pitch parameter. You can also use the following link presets. They have been created to include the ideal format correction curve for the particular musical name. Check out the pull-down menu or simply click on the button to cycle through the presets. The presets have predefined format curves that cannot be edited, so make sure to select Free if you want to adjust the format curve to your liking. Below the Links section are the pitch and format controls. You can use the pull-down menus to select pitch intervals from a keyboard graphic menu. Here you can only make half-step interval selections. You can also click next to the arrow and drag up or down to adjust the pitch interval with a more fine resolution. Click and drag left or right in the formants field to adjust its value. Remember, you can also click on the markers in the graphic display to control these same parameters. Let's take ultra pitch for a test drive on a vocal track. Remember, option clicking on the controls will reset them to their default values.
If you fail, just try it again. Don't give up on that girl with beautiful pale skin. And if your spirit breaks, she'll fix you with glue. She can ward off the devil with fictions of voodoo. Because she's dynamite, girl, she's dynamite. When we go out, she makes me feel alright. Dynamite, girl, she's dynamite. When we go out, I never wanna be without her. We've seen the face of a drama queen wrapped around your heart and saying things that she'll never mean. You could go, but you know that you won't. You'll sit beside yourself and enjoy her on speakerphone. Because she's dynamite, the girl, she's dynamite. When we go out, she makes me feel alright. Dynamite, the girl, she's dynamite. When we go out, I never wanna be without her. I think that I'd die without her. If you fail, just try it again. Don't give up on that girl with beautiful pale.
As you can see, ultra pitch is very powerful and yet intuitive due to Wave's easy-to-tweak graphic interface. Make sure to check out your Waves plugins user guide for even more information and helpful tips.
We go out, she makes me feel alright. Dynamite.